Chapter 644. When they saw Lu Feng's figure appear, the few patriarchs surrounded him at the same time. As almighty existences at the virtual king realm, they didn't care about anything in the outside world. Even if a war between races broke out, they would just be hot-blooded and fight with everything they had. However, at this moment, their faces were filled with slight anxiety. This undoubtedly showed Lu Feng's position and importance in their hearts. The patriarchs didn't say anything. They just looked at Lu Feng quietly, trying to figure out something from Lu Feng's expression. However, after looking at him for a while, their expressions changed slightly. This was because they realized that Lu Feng's expression made it impossible for them to tell what was going to happen. If he had succeeded, then Lu Feng should be excited. After all, he had defeated the human king. Lu Feng should be extremely excited. This meant that he had truly surpassed the primogenitor human king. If he had failed, then he should be slightly sad and depressed. However, at this moment Lu Feng was disappointed. This wasn't the disappointment of a narrow defeat, but a regretful disappointment. Finally, the three patriarchs, who were the noblest existences among them, started to ask questions. Lu Feng, did you succeed? If this had happened before, they would have asked if he had failed. However, at this moment, these people hoped that Lu Feng would succeed. Because of the hope in their hearts, they asked, "Did you succeed?" Lu Feng looked at the three patriarchs and smiled faintly. When the three patriarchs said this, Lu Feng understood what they meant. Lu Feng nodded gently. "Fortunately, I did not fail." These four simple words were like a sudden clap of thunder in their hearts. In an instant, these patriarchs were stunned. They looked at Lu Feng in disbelief. Fortunately, he did not fail. He actually did not fail. This meant that Lu Feng had succeeded. Lu Feng had really succeeded. He wanted to laugh happily and heave a sigh of relief. However, at this moment, Lu Feng's expression did not seem to be one of joy after a victory. This time, the feeling that Lu Feng gave people was one of regret. There was even a hint of sadness. They didn't understand why Lu Feng would have such an expression even though he had clearly won. Of course, these old ancestors also understood that Lu Feng wouldn't lie to them. First of all, Lu Feng didn't have to do that. His reputation was already so great. He had already completed a sacred site that not even the human king primogenitor could complete. Moreover, this challenge was carried out under Lu Feng's insistence. There was no need for him to fabricate lies. Furthermore, this was also the most important point. The person who said this was Lu Feng. He was Emperor Lu Feng. His words were the supreme imperial edict. His existence was the definition of truth. Lu Feng definitely wouldn't lie. Therefore, these people believed him. They believed him absolutely. However, if Lu Feng wasn't lying, then Lu Feng had really succeeded. However, Lu Feng's current appearance was completely different from when he had succeeded. This caused many existences to be truly confused. When he sensed the puzzled and silent expressions of the old ancestors, Lu Feng finally spoke. "Old ancestors, I have indeed won this time. However, my victory is not that significant. Among them is the mark of the human king's supremacy. Its combat strength is indeed terrifying. Although it is at the peak of the perfect stage and slightly stronger than Rong Yuanyu, who I encountered previously, it is still a pity. However, it is also a pity." Everyone frowned slightly. However, they quickly understood and nodded in silence. The third forefather finally spoke. "That's right. What you desire to encounter is the peak of the human king's supremacy, the human king's supremacy of the same level as you in your youth. However, this mark is ultimately just a mark. It does not have the will of the human king within it. Therefore, it is still lacking." No wonder Lu Feng felt regretful. Perhaps for other people, even if they were other geniuses or even monstrous geniuses, this wasn't much. After all, even if the human king was just a mark, it was still a peak that they could never imagine. However, for Lu Feng, this was a pity. That was because he was the emperor. His existence was eternal loneliness. He longed for such an existence that could fight him at the same level. Originally, his greatest hope had been the mark of the human king. However, after the battle, he was still disappointed. When they saw Lu Feng's appearance, they didn't know what to say. However, they were also slightly glad in their hearts. After all, Lu Feng had won. This was their greatest gain. His terrifying battle record of never losing had not been erased. His invincible fighting spirit had not been damaged. Lu Feng smiled faintly as he looked at the forefathers. Although I did not have a battle with a true human king primogenitor, what I gained this time is already a great gain. I am already very satisfied. Lu Feng was really satisfied. After all, during the era of the emperor, he had only succeeded in condensing the mark but had never used it. Being able to use it this time made Lu Feng feel that this battle had not been in vain. When they saw Lu Feng's expression and heard his words, they nodded gently and didn't say anything else about this battle. However, while the few of them were silent, Lu Feng hesitated for a moment. In the end, a hint of determination flashed in his eyes. He looked at the few patriarchs and said, "Let's go. Let's go. Forefathers, Lu Feng has something to tell you." When they saw Lu Feng's solemn expression, the forefathers' faces also became slightly solemn. They knew that if Lu Feng was so serious, it must be something very important. Therefore, these people were really serious. Since he had already decided to tell them everything, Lu Feng did not hesitate any longer. He looked at the forefathers and said slowly, "Forefathers, I want to say that there is no need to go to the foreign battlefield where the emperor is sealed." The forefathers still didn't say anything. They knew that Lu Feng definitely had something else to say. Sure enough, Lu Feng paused for a moment before continuing. "My greatest gain this time is not what I obtained. It is what I know. Although I'm not very sure, I have a faint feeling. That feeling makes me believe it." At this moment, a strange look appeared on the faces of the ancestors. There was even a hint of excitement on their faces. They weren't idiots. On the contrary, they were all true wise men with great wisdom. Therefore, after thinking about it for a moment, they already understood a little. I can feel the call of the bloodline coming from the brand. Although it is only for a moment, that call is real. Our forefather, the first human monarch, is not dead. The news that Lu Feng brought was too shocking and too important. Although they had vaguely guessed something, they still couldn't help but be completely shocked when Lu Feng said it. The human monarch was not dead. The human monarch was actually not dead. One had to know that in the universe, the human monarch had always been a sacred relic. More than 4,000 years ago, the human monarch had appeared out of nowhere. In just a few hundred years, he had reached a level that made billions of living beings bow their heads in worship and made the galaxy era tremble. I hate the heavens for granting me the emperor's name and for living in the same world as the monarch. The first monarch of all time, the strongest existence in history. This series of titles all belonged to the human monarch. The existence of the human monarch was a true belief. It could be said that in the era of the human monarch, the human race was fully deserving of the title of the strongest overlord. In that era, the human monarch and the emperor divine king made the human race invincible. It wouldn't be a problem even if they collided with all the pinnacle overlord races. It was just that the human monarch and the emperor divine king had some misgivings and didn't go overboard in their conquest, allowing the other pinnacle overlords to continue. However, this couldn't erase the terror of the human monarch. The disappearance of the human monarch was a shocking secret in the universe. In the eyes of almost everyone, the human monarch was already dead. He might have perished under the most mysterious and terrifying curse of the divine king. Even the people of the Lu family thought so. The existence of the Lu family in the future put all their energy into searching for the traces of the human monarch. Of course, what the Lu family really wanted to know was the truth behind the fall of the human monarch. They had never believed that the human monarch could still be alive. However, who would have thought that Lu Feng would actually say something that would shock the entire Lu family? Naturally, they believed Lu Feng's words to a certain extent. The Lu family knew that Lu Feng had the richest bloodline of the human monarch. If there was anyone in the Lu family who could sense the existence of the human monarch, it would be Lu Feng. Since Lu Feng had said something like this, they would really believe him. The third and fourth ancestors asked Lu Feng a few questions before leaving. Lu Feng knew that they had entered the human monarch palace to look for the primogenitor of the Lu family. The two great monarchs of the heretic path had gone to report to Lu Feng. The news that the human monarch was still alive was too shocking. If the human monarch was still alive, then the situation of the entire universe would instantly change. Lu Shun had asked the elders not to spread this news, so the ancestors naturally understood the crux of the matter and wouldn't speak carelessly. However, although Lu Shun was solemn and the ancestors were serious, the joy on their faces was unconcealable. If the human monarch was still alive, then the Lu family would definitely shock the world. There was a sovereign personage above, a supreme ruler. His lifespan was probably already close to unlimited. Then, there was Lu Feng, a taboo monarch who could surpass the human monarch. It could be said that in the near future, the Lu family might even have two supreme rulers living at the same time. If that was the case, the Lu family would undoubtedly be the strongest force in the boundless galaxy, or even in the endless space-time. Even during the primordial immortal demon era, they would probably be considered the pinnacle. After all, although the supreme rulers of the primordial immortal demon era belonged to the immortal demon race and the demon race, they belonged to different powers. After coming out of the path of inheritance, Lu Feng didn't go to the Lu family's meeting hall again. The first person he looked for was Lu Luo. This was because Lu Feng had already promised Lu Luo that he would fight Lu Luo after he came out. Of course, this so-called fight was actually Lu Feng giving Lu Luo pointers. Chapter 645. After receiving Lu Feng's sky network, Lu Luo quickly appeared at the agreed place. The two of them met and looked at each other. Looking at Lu Feng, Lu Luo smiled. "You won." Lu Feng nodded lightly. At this moment, Lu Luo's face finally showed a trace of seriousness as he nodded lightly. Although he had incomparable confidence in Lu Feng, and even a little respect for him, he grew up listening to the legends of the human king. In his heart, the human king ancestor was not his ancestor, but the utmost immortal that had fallen to the mortal world. Now that he heard that the utmost immortal had been defeated, the impact was too terrifying. Silence, endless silence. However, this silence did not last for long. In the next moment, Lu Luo raised his head and looked at Lu Feng with a burning gaze. This time, you can be considered to have truly surpassed the human king ancestor. Lu Feng was silent. After nodding his head, he gently shook his head. This scene puzzled Lu Luo. However, Lu Feng did not explain anything to Lu Luo. It can't be considered complete. Let's start this battle first. I want to see how far you've come after such a long time. Hearing that Lu Feng was about to start, Lu Luo did not intend to ask any more questions. At this moment, an unprecedented turbulent emotion appeared in his eyes. The current him was already at the pinnacle of demigod realm level 3. As long as he had a little bit of opportunity, he could break through and condense his own godhead, entering the pinnacle of demigod realm level 4. The demigod realm level 4. This was no longer the demigod realm. This was the demigod realm. Moreover, Lu Luo had a plan. A plan that would allow him to transform and be qualified to compete for everything. Although it was crazy, he, Lu Luo, was a proud person. For the sake of this one possibility, he was willing to go crazy. After all, this was the only chance he had. His whole body was trembling, as if a world-shaking massacre was about to happen in the next moment. However, at this moment, Lu Feng smiled and shook his head lightly. Could it be that you want to have a decisive battle here? I think that when we are done fighting, the old ancestors of our clans will come and kill us. Lu Luo looked at his surroundings, and a slightly awkward expression appeared on his face. The place where Lu Feng had arranged to meet him was just a small square. Around them were ancient buildings full of mottled historical marks. These buildings were really just buildings, although they were much, much stronger than ordinary buildings. However, once the two of them started fighting, these buildings would be reduced to ashes in an instant. One had to know that this was the human king planet, the birthplace of the Lu family. Everything around it was a testament to the rise and fall of the human king and Lu family. It was a mark left behind by them. If this place was destroyed, although it wouldn't be like what Lu Feng said, where the Lu family's old ancestor would come after them, the punishment would still be unavoidable. Moreover, as members of the Lu family, they lived here and regarded everything here as their glory. They couldn't possibly destroy this place. Therefore, Lu Luo felt a little awkward. Lu Feng smiled faintly and pointed into the distance. I remember that there should be a fighting ring over there. The existence of the fighting ring can withstand a clash between true gods. Therefore, there shouldn't be any problems if we clash. Lu Luo nodded and followed Lu Feng to the fighting ring. The news that Lu Feng was going to fight Lu Luo spread throughout the human king planet in an instant. Lu Luo had once been the #1 genius of the human king and Lu family. He had been recognized as the young master of the human king and Lu family's younger generation. These people believed that if Lu Feng hadn't appeared, Lu Luo would definitely have become the young master of the human king and Lu family. He might even have become the next family head. As for Lu Feng, he had already become the faith of many of the human king and Lu family's younger generation. Now, when they met the younger generation of the other aristocratic families wouldn't have the same arrogant expression as before. Anyone who saw a member of the Lu family would be extremely respectful. They were much more respectful than they had been in the past. The Lu family's younger generation understood that this scene had occurred because of Lu Feng's appearance. They still remembered clearly that when the younger generation talked about them, they would say that they were members of the Emperor Lu Feng's family. In the past, these people would say that they were members of the human king and Lu family. However, now, the younger generation only talked about Emperor Lu Feng. It was obvious that in the eyes and hearts of many of the younger generation, Lu Feng's existence had already surpassed the Lu family's deterrence. Therefore, the entire Lu family's younger generation didn't feel any estrangement towards Lu Feng. However, this time, news of a competition between the two of them had spread. This caused a sensation in the entire Lu family. They knew that Lu Feng and Lu Luo weren't on the same level at all. Their confrontation was meaningless. The implications of this made people ponder deeply. Could the young master want to protect his prestige and status, so he wants to suppress young Master Luo in public? Impossible. Given the young master's power, there is simply no need for him to do this. His existence isn't something that young Master Luo can shake. Or perhaps young Master Luo isn't convinced that the young master has usurped his position and is a little crazy. That can't be right. We all know what kind of person young Master Luo is. He definitely wouldn't do such a thing. Then, what exactly is it? Many people voiced their own guesses, but they were all denied by others. Just like that, before the competition, the entire Lu family's younger generation was already making wild guesses. However, they would never have guessed that this battle was just for the sake of breaking through to the next realm. For the sake of a glimmer of hope, Lu Luo had asked for Lu Feng's help. Countless members of the Lu family had already crowded the area around the arena. They all stood beside the arena with different expressions on their faces. In the arena, Lu Feng's face was full of helplessness. He looked at Lu Luo in front of him and said, "I didn't expect a simple exchange of pointers to attract so many people. It even caused such a commotion when he heard Lu Feng's words. Lu Luo smiled faintly. I didn't expect that even the family's elders would come out. It seems that our battle involves too many people. Just now, the two of them had arrived at the side of the arena. There were many youths competing in the arena, so Lu Luo directly found an elder in charge and told him that he was going to fight with Lu Feng. When the elder heard this, he immediately made a decision. Originally, the members of the Lu family were very dissatisfied when they heard that they had been asked to leave so that the two of them could compete. However, when they found out that Lu Feng and Lu Luo were going to compete, they all went crazy. Of course, this craziness referred to the craziness of spreading the news and calling their friends to come here and watch the shocking battle. The two of them wanted to clear the arena, not for the sake of their reputation, but for the sake of the members of the Lu family. Lu Luo was the Emperor of Massacre, the most powerful Emperor of Massacre. His power had already reached the peak of the third level of the demigod realm. Once his power was fully unleashed, his full power would be comparable to that of an ordinary peak demigod. As for Lu Feng, he was a terrifying existence that could even suppress a true god who had condensed a supreme divine body. For such an existence to crush a peak demigod would be like a joke. If a battle broke out, perhaps nothing would happen to the arena, but the members of the Lu family on it would be annihilated in an instant. Therefore, for the sake of safety, they still chose to monopolize the arena. Originally, after the arena was cleared, the battle could begin. However, the elders who had rushed over did not agree. They hoped that Lu Feng could wait until almost everyone had arrived before starting the battle. Although Lu Feng's current status was much higher than these elders, these people were still his elders. Lu Feng could not ignore their request. Therefore, the current situation occurred. After waiting for a while, Lu Feng finally looked at the side of the arena, where an elder had been smiling. At that moment, Lu Feng's voice rang out. Elder Lu Yunxiu, may I ask if we can begin? Hearing Lu Feng's words, Elder Lu Yunxiu looked around and smiled even more brightly. He nodded and said, Young master, I've kept you waiting. Now let's begin. Hearing this, the noise below stopped instantly. Everyone looked at the arena at the same time. When they saw this, the two of them knew that the battle could begin. In an instant, Lu Luo retreated nearly 1,000 meters. He looked at Lu Feng and realized that he was no longer suppressing his battle intent. Instead, it started to boil. It started to boil endlessly. Lu Luo knew that although he was the Emperor of Massacre at the peak, he was still far from being comparable to Lu Fenglai. Lu Feng's existence was too terrifying. Suppressing him would be as easy as flipping his hand. This time, he hoped that with Lu Feng's help, he could break through his current cultivation level. Therefore, he could not keep hiding his strength like the others and only unleash it at the last moment. What he needed to do was to reach the peak. He needed to continuously break through one peak after another. Therefore, he used all his power right from the start. Lu Feng was unusually calm as he looked at Lu Luo, who was in an endless turmoil in the distance. He looked at Lu Luo. No one noticed the faint flicker of emotion in the depths of his eyes. It was a slightly apologetic look. Lu Feng could sense that this power, which was comparable to a peak god's, should be Lu Luo's peak power. However, there was not much bloodline power in it. The human monarch Lu family was known as the #1 family in the world. The human monarch bloodline was also known as the strongest royal bloodline in the endless epochs. However, in such a family with the strongest bloodline, as a direct descendant of the family, Lu Luo's greatest strength was not his bloodline. In fact, the power of his bloodline only occupied a small portion of his power. This made Lu Feng fall completely silent. Lu Luo was the Emperor of Massacre at the peak. Lu Feng knew that if Lu Luo's bloodline had not been extracted, he could have used those divine items to enhance his bloodline power and become a supreme power. In that case, he would at least be the Emperor of Massacre. It should be known that the bloodline of the Lu family was the bloodline of the supreme ruler. The bloodline of the epic Overlord already belonged to the category of supreme power. As for the bloodline of the Lu family, it was the pinnacle of supreme power. Unfortunately, Lu Luo did not have such an opportunity. He could only become the Emperor of Massacre at the peak. He could only continue to search for that slim chance during the War of the Kings. Lu Feng knew that the reason for all this was Lu Feng himself. Chapter 646. Finally, Lu Luo moved. Although Lu Feng didn't condense any power or use any power, he didn't care at all. Instead, he used his strongest power to attack Lu Feng. At that moment, the winds and clouds changed and space-time trembled. Lu Luo didn't hold back in his attack. It was the most powerful attack of a peak deity. If this attack hadn't been on the Emperor's star, which was full of sealing power, it would have been enough to pierce through everything and shatter space-time into nothingness. After all, this was a peak deity. In the universe, gods could be considered to be invincible. This was the pinnacle expert of any pinnacle overlord. However, there were many seals on the human king planet. Even the existence of the virtual king was restricted. Therefore, Lu Luo's peerless attack was no longer as terrifying as it had been in the outside world. However, although he couldn't unleash an earth-shattering aura like he had in the outside world, the shock caused at that moment still made many of the Lu family's disciples feel suffocated. Lu Feng's eyes were completely calm as he watched Lu Luo, who was charging over with a mighty killing intent. If this had been before the battle with Rong Yuanyu, Lu Feng might have been a little concerned. After all, although he could suppress a peak deity, he had to pay a huge price. However, it was different now. It was completely different. This was because Lu Feng had condensed the sixth supreme power. His terrifying strength had been raised to a whole new level. At the moment, peak deities were nothing to him. They were nothing at all. When the killing intent was about to arrive, Lu Feng finally moved. He didn't choose the bloodline power. Choosing to use the bloodline power at such a time and place would undoubtedly make many people feel uncomfortable. Lu Feng chose the great demon power, the power of the monarch, the power of life, and the power of death. The four supreme powers belonged to the pinnacle of supreme powers. After the transformation, the existence of the great demon power and the power of the monarch had already surpassed the limit of a supreme power. The two types of supreme powers added together were completely equivalent to three types of supreme powers. This meant that the supreme powers that Lu Feng was using were equivalent to 5 supreme powers. 5 types of supreme forces, in addition to Lu Feng's martial arts, comprehension level, and so on, were absolutely terrifying. Therefore, even though he was 3 levels lower than Lu Luo, who was at the pinnacle of the demigod realm at this moment, he was obviously much stronger than Lu Luo. When the peerless killing intent arrived, all Lu Feng did was wave his arm. Lu Feng had accepted Lu Luo's challenge so that he could break through. If he just evaded, Lu Luo wouldn't stand a chance. Moreover, when Lu Feng sensed the power contained in Lu Luo's attack, he instantly made a decision. He had decided to repay Lu Luo. Lu Luo was really powerful. Among the 7 great sovereigns of the younger generation, he was ranked in the top 3. Although this was in the absence of those monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses, being able to be ranked in the top 3 among so many living beings was already a terrifying strength. Currently, he was a peak 3rd-level demigod. His power was limitless. In Lu Feng's opinion, he was about the same as the Desolate Emperor. His cultivation base was 1 level higher than the Desolate Emperor. If it wasn't for the fact that he hadn't comprehended a supreme power, the Desolate Emperor would definitely not be a match for him. With a punch, the heaven and earth would collapse. It pressed forward courageously and destroyed all domineering auras. This was the true essence of Lu Luo. Lu Feng sensed the shadow of death. This was a sign that he had begun to comprehend the true essence of death. There were too few people who could achieve this. Lu Luo was terrifying. He was able to activate the power of death. Unfortunately, his opponent was Lu Feng, a monarch. Lu Feng's cultivation base was lower than his. However, after activating 4 supreme powers, his power was definitely much stronger than Lu Luo's. Therefore, the collision this time was simple and clear. Lu Luo was sent flying far away. As for Lu Feng, he merely stood on the same spot quietly. There was nothing unusual about him. The result of the collision made everyone understand. At the same time, they were incomparably shocked. They had all heard rumors about Lu Feng. Today, this was their first time witnessing it. However, this was their first time witnessing it. Yet, it made them tremble in shock. Young Master Luo's strongest attack was actually unable to move young Master Luo in the slightest. This is the difference in strength. Many people of the younger generation sighed. The difference in strength was too great. Although Lu Luo's cultivation base was almost 1 level higher than Lu Feng's, there was still a huge gap between him and Lu Luo. Lu Luo stood up from the stage that was filled with cracks but remained undamaged. He activated his weak bloodline power, allowing Lu Luo's body to recover quickly. He looked at Lu Feng with an incomparably turbulent expression. As a martial artist, his calmness had already disappeared. At this moment, he was gradually burning with madness. It was incomparably terrifying. The battles between the younger generation never lack passion and hot-bloodedness. However, they almost never go crazy. However, the existence of young master has led the younger generation to an extreme. For the sake of their dreams and victory, they will persist to the extreme of madness. This is young master's power. This is young master's influence. Today, he is the supreme soul of the younger generation of the human race. A few elders had already begun to sigh. They understood that after Lu Feng's shocking battles, after Lu Feng's crazy miracles and sacred relics, he had finally replaced the former heavenly deity Jialan, replaced his father Lu Tao, and even replaced the divine king's position in the hearts of the younger generation. Lu Feng had already become a totem and a source of faith. His performance had led the younger generation to glory. Lu Luo, didn't you want to break through? However, what will you use to break through? What qualifications do you have to break through? How can you break through? Where is your fighting spirit? Where is your soul? Where is your fighting spirit? Let's fight. Let me see what you will use to become a peak demigod. What do you want to use to break the last shackles? Lu Feng's roar made Lu Luo, whose aura had already reached its peak, even crazier. His eyes were filled with a shocking killing intent, causing everyone who saw it to tremble. They had never seen Lu Luo like this before. Not even during the confrontation between the young masters or when the Lu family had been bullied. However, this time, Lu Feng's words had stimulated Lu Luo, causing him to finally let go of everything. The crazy Lu Luo became even more berserk. He had already forgotten about the injuries on his body and the gap between him and Lu Feng. At the moment, all that existed in his mind was to kill, kill, kill. He would kill until heaven and earth were destroyed, until time ceased to exist. There were billions of obstructions, all for the sake of killing. Amidst the haze, the projection of the human monarch appeared behind Lu Luo. His bloodline power was extremely weak, yet he could summon the projection of the human monarch. With the support of the projection, an endless river appeared behind him. That was the Eastwater Luo River. The Eastwater Luo Emperor, Lu Luo, was the Luo River Emperor who had nurtured an unparalleled powerhouse. Upheaval of the ages. This powerful strike had triggered the projection of the human monarch and the martial path incarnations of the Eastwater Luo River. At the moment, Lu Luo had already faintly reached the peak. Lu Feng had a satisfied look in his eyes. He knew that his strength had finally awakened the unwillingness in Lu Luo's heart and awakened the roar hidden in the depths of his soul. At the moment, Lu Luo had already started to surpass his limits and create a legend. I am the Emperor! Lu Feng's earth-shattering strike, which had transformed into an ancient emperor, easily suppressed everything. It had directly shattered Lu Luo's upheaval of the ages and sent Lu Luo flying once again. As he felt the slight tremors in his body, Lu Feng's eyes glowed brighter and brighter. At the moment, his fighting spirit was actually faintly ignited. Although Lu Luo's strike couldn't compare to his peak state, it was already close to the level of 3 supreme powers. This made Lu Feng slightly excited. All right. After a simple word, Lu Feng disappeared completely. In the entire world, apart from the elders who were above the immortal level, who could faintly sense Lu Feng's presence, no one else could see a trace of his figure. However, in the next moment they knew where Lu Feng was. This was because Lu Feng had already appeared beside the frenzied Lu Luo. Unmoving as a mountain, moving as heaven and earth. This was Lu Feng. This was the strength of an emperor. This was the first time Lu Feng had made a move. It was also the first time he had taken the initiative to kill. It was the same attack, but it was much more powerful than Lu Luo's previous killing blow. In the face of such a terrifying attack, no one among the younger generation could find an opponent. However, the crazed Lu Luo shocked everyone. The eyes of the older generation of the Lu family shone brightly when they saw him. Because he had really caught it. Boundless power burst forth and actually extinguished the frenzied killing intent. It had been extinguished in an instant. This was what Lu Feng had displayed previously. Now, Lu Luo had displayed it completely. This scene caused Lu Feng to tremble slightly as well. Was it over? No. Not yet. He was Lu Luo, the Eastwater Luo Emperor, one of the 7 great supremes of the younger generation. How could his killing intent be so casual and simple? Therefore, in the instant that Lu Feng was slightly stunned, Lu Luo's killing intent appeared once again. It swept across the sky and shook the void. This was an extreme killing intent. No one had expected that Lu Luo would be so powerful when he clashed with Lu Feng. A terrifying collision. Lu Feng's figure was sent flying. This was the first time he had retreated since the start of the battle. He had been sent flying by a powerful killing intent. However, Lu Luo was the same. Although he concealed his peerless killing intent, when had Lu Feng ever been afraid? Up until now, Lu Feng had clashed with many strong opponents. Every time he fought, it was a battle that exceeded his limits. When it came to fighting with strong opponents, Lu Luo was a few years older, but he was still no match for Lu Feng. Lu Feng stood in the void and gently wiped the purple-gold blood from the corner of his mouth. He smiled. It was a satisfied smile. Although he had overestimated Lu Luo, Lu Feng had not expected Lu Luo to be so strong. If you clashed, I'm afraid that the desolate emperor would be on par with you. Your true fighting strength might not be comparable to the desolate emperor, who possesses the power of the desolate wilderness. However, your fighting experience and willpower are stronger than the desolate emperor's. Therefore, if you clashed, it would be hard to say who would emerge victorious. Chapter 647. Lu Feng's words reverberated throughout the void. No one could say that he was arrogant or that he was commenting on those monstrous existences. This was because he was Emperor Lu Feng. He had the right to comment on anything. Hearing this, Lu Luo's crazed eyes trembled slightly. He opened his mouth but did not say anything. He just looked at Lu Feng quietly. At this moment, he had put all his will into this battle. Right now, he had even temporarily forgotten how to speak. This was what it meant to put all of one's effort into this battle. Lu Feng smiled faintly. The slight damage from before had already disappeared in an instant. At this moment, Lu Feng's fighting strength started to soar. Using 4 types of unparalleled power was equivalent to using 5 types of unparalleled power. However, up till now, Lu Feng had only used them to raise his cultivation state. He had not released any of them at all. Otherwise, Lu Luo would have been completely suppressed in an instant. East Water Luo Emperor, you are worthy of such a title. However, I don't think you are satisfied with such a title. What you want now is the East God Luo Emperor, the East King Luo Emperor. I will help you achieve it. Lu Feng's aura was completely unleashed. At this moment, his power was close to limitless. It made the world tremble. The stifling atmosphere caused everyone around the arena to fall into a state of panic. At this moment, they finally understood the strength of the number 1 monstrous existence in the endless space-time. This was an unparalleled strength. This was a strength that had no reason at all. It was simply impossible to resist. It was simply impossible to resist. He gently stretched out his arm. In an instant, the world seemed to darken. At this moment, Lu Feng was like a supreme ruler. He controlled heaven and earth and suppressed space-time. Although there was an indistinct human king projection behind him, and although there was a huge martial path avatar, Lu Feng was just one person. He was so insignificant. However, when the two of them faced each other, the crowd felt as if an ancient giant was quietly looking down on a clamoring ant. Without a doubt, Lu Feng was that ancient giant. He was that ancient great emperor. Let's fight. It was a simple and ordinary sentence, but it was like a monstrous wave that rolled over the mortal world and washed away the dust. Lu Luo made his move. It was still that terrifying murderous aura. After fusing with the Martial Path Avatar and the Human King Avatar, he launched an unparalleled killing attack. He tore through the void and instantly descended. Lu Feng was speechless. His eyes were calm, and the will of a grand emperor trembled as he waved his arm. Powerful, powerful, too unimaginably powerful. At this moment, Lu Luo had the combat power of a pinnacle deity. However, in front of Lu Feng, he was just a mortal. Unable to fight back, he was instantly sent flying far away. But the word "give up" was too heavy for Lu Luo to bear. Therefore, he did not give up. His blood boiled and his soul roared. Lu Luo forgot everything else. His killing intent was infinitely shocking. Killing through the galaxy, the sun, and the moon, killing through the gods of heaven and earth. The dignity of a divine being was immortal and indestructible. Lu Luo was a divine being, so how could he, who was at his limit, fail so easily? In an instant, the shadow of death descended and shrouded Lu Luo. This was the power of death. It was enough to annihilate and devour all living beings in an instant. When it was fully mastered, it could even devour the laws of time and space. Death descends. Death descends. This was not a shocking killing attack, but a shrouding of the shadow of death. It was a transformation of the power of death. Death enhanced by death was even more terrifying. In the past, Lu Luo was a gentle and elegant young master in the eyes of countless people. However, now he was like an emissary of death. Even looking at him would make people tremble and die. This was a heaven-shaking phenomenon, a terrifying divine ability. Anyone who came into contact with it would die. When Lu Luo used the power of death, even those divine beings who were stronger than him would be afraid. They would avoid or even stay away from it. After all, once one was tainted by the power of death, it would constantly devour one's strength until nothing was left. Without a doubt, this power was something that no one wanted to come into contact with. However, Lu Feng was not included in this list. If Lu Luo was the emissary of death, then Lu Feng was the incarnation of death. No matter how powerful the emissary was, he still had to rely on the power of death. Among the 6 supreme powers that Lu Feng had comprehended, the power of death was one of them. Moreover, his power of death was the true essence of death. It was even purer than the power of death comprehended by those quasi-kings. After all, those invincible almighties had only comprehended one kind of power. However, Lu Feng had felt the true essence of death through hundreds of millions of life and death situations. He possessed the essence of death. Therefore, Lu Feng's death was the purest form of death. The shadow of death shrouded the world, and Lu Feng's invincible figure was shrouded in it. In an instant, everyone seemed to see the moment when Lu Feng was swallowed by the darkness. They saw the image of the emissary of death brandishing the scythe of the grim reaper, reaping lives. However, when they saw Lu Feng get swallowed up, no one was shocked or worried about Lu Feng. After all, they knew that it was impossible for someone with this kind of strength to defeat Lu Feng. However, no matter how much these people believed in Lu Feng, what happened next still made them tremble deeply. Perhaps the most powerful and all-shattering darkness, or the violent tearing of the void, didn't count for much. After all, there was a huge gulf between Lu Feng and Lu Luo. However, the scene that unfolded this time made them unable to believe their eyes. That was because Lu Feng had actually swallowed everything. Swallowed. He was already being swallowed, yet in the next moment, he had actually swallowed everything to fight back. The endless shadow of death was completely swallowed up by Lu Feng in front of the many Lu family members. Lu Luo didn't move. He just looked at Lu Feng in shock. Lu Luo's heart skipped a beat as he looked at the indifferent figure in the center of the world. After a slight change in his expression, he finally attacked again. Yes, we have all forgotten. Among the supreme powers that the young master comprehended, one of the supreme powers is the power of death. What young master Luo used was just a derivation of the true meaning of death. How could a derivation resist the power of death? His failure is also within reason. Many of the Lu family members, who had been paying close attention to Lu Feng, sighed softly. They instantly understood. The other members of the Lu family also understood. Lu Luo, who was in the void, became even crazier. Endless death entangled him. Every time he waved his arm, he could shatter the void and corrode everything within it. Lu Feng was safe and sound. He had always been at the very center of this boundless space, and had always been the most majestic of marks. He had already used all four supreme powers. Therefore, at this moment, he had the power to easily crush any pinnacle true god. No matter how strong Lu Luo was, he was only comparable to a pinnacle true god. He did not even have the ability to kill a pinnacle true god. Therefore, how could he fight against Lu Feng? Every punch was the limit of a bloodline. It was the pinnacle of madness. Lu Luo had really gone crazy. This time, he was the one who initiated the challenge. He wanted to forcefully break through and become a pinnacle true god through battle. However, to Lu Luo, he had never encountered such a terrifying suppression. Even though he knew how strong Lu Feng was and that he was far from being a match for Lu Feng, when facing Lu Feng at this moment, when all of his killing moves and all of his trump cards were useless, Lu Luo still could not bear it. He went completely crazy. Ever since he was young, although he had lost his bloodline and was incomparably humble, he, Lu Luo, had always been a monster. He had always been the emperor of slaughter. Although he had lost the power of his bloodline, he could still fight against countless geniuses and even monsters. Among the younger generation, he had once been the second strongest person in the world. His glory and achievements had far surpassed those who had relied on their bloodline. However, now, in front of Lu Feng, his so-called glory and self-confidence had all turned to nothing. They had all been completely shattered by Lu Feng. This was a feeling he had only felt when fighting against the monstrous geniuses of the previous generation of the Lu family. However, at this moment, in front of an existence who was even younger than him, he was facing an incomparably terrifying suppression. This was really unbearable for Lu Luo. It was really unbearable. Kill! Kill! His mouth was silent, but at this moment, his mind was telling everyone that he wanted to kill. He wanted to kill everything. Lu Feng was still as indifferent as ever. He allowed the supreme killing power to continuously descend upon him. He shattered it again and again, leaving Lu Luo with no power to resist. Lu Feng knew that this was the true essence of the power of death. Once used, one would fall into an endless cycle of death and slaughter. Their will would sink and become the ultimate power to kill everything. Once, twice, 1,000 times, 10,000 times. The strength of Lu Luo's arms was getting weaker and weaker. Everyone understood that he had already reached his limit. He didn't have much power left. Finally, at the last moment, Lu Luo stopped waving his arms. He looked at Lu Feng with a hint of confusion and hesitation in his eyes. However, in the next moment, all these expressions disappeared and were replaced by a kind of crazy determination. The shadow behind him became even more obvious. It had even exceeded the limit of what his bloodline could summon. Countless existences were shocked and horrified when they saw this scene. That is a supreme technique. That is the strongest supreme technique passed down in the Lu family, the royal descent, the ultimate and most powerful killing technique in the scripture of the human king, the royal descent. The king's descent was the most powerful technique that was more terrifying than any other supreme technique in the universe. It was a technique that surpassed any killing power. In the current era, besides the three supreme techniques of the outer Dharma, there was no other technique that could compare to the royal descent. It represented the ultimate limit of power on the path of martial arts. At the same time, the severe injuries brought about by the royal descent were also indescribable. Especially now, after Lu Luo's madness, the aftereffects of his supreme technique were even more terrifying. Nobody knew why they were sparring this time. Previously, they had wanted to find out. However, it seemed like there was no need to do so now. After all, the appearance of the royal descent already represented Lu Luo's madness. Using a supreme technique, especially the royal descent, represented a kind of extreme, a kind of madness, or even a kind of unflinching death. A few elders wanted to make a move. However, just as they were about to do so, they felt a kind of terrifying intent descend upon them. This was the intent of an emperor. These elders didn't understand why Lu Feng had stopped them. Could Lu Feng really want Lu Luo to die, just as those people had guessed? Did he really want Lu Luo to die so that he could smoothly become the pride of the Lu family's younger generation? This wasn't true. Nobody was willing to believe this, because what Lu Feng had displayed was a kind of limit, a kind of belief. He represented the totem of the younger generation. Lu Luo's existence was no threat to Lu Feng at all. However, why did he want to stop them? Why did he want to seriously injure Lu Luo? After a moment of absent-mindedness, it was already impossible for him to do anything. In the next moment, Lu Luo, who had used the royal descent, finally arrived in front of Lu Feng. His eyes shone with a shocking divine light. Lu Feng could feel the terror of the royal descent. This kind of extreme power was enough to obliterate a peak divine being. As expected of, the royal descent. Chapter 648. Lu Feng made his move. The moment Wang Lin descended, he did not choose to passively defend himself. Instead, he unleashed a supreme attack that shook the world. Earth King Tong originated from the scripture of the human king. It belonged to the second level of the low-level Earth King Tong chapter. However, Earth King Tong's existence could be said to be much lower than Wang Lin's. However, a lower level did not mean that it would definitely fail. This was because Lu Feng was too powerful. Earth King Tong absorbed the power of the endless earth, fused it into one, and unleashed the most powerful attack. At this moment, Lu Feng was the Earth King. In an instant, the collision caused countless annihilations. The void shattered, and the powerful impact caused the expressions of countless elders to change drastically. In the next moment, they had already begun to seal the void. These people all understood that if they allowed this absolute killing power to descend, the members of the Lu family would really suffer heavy losses. This time, there were many elders who took action. There were even true God-level elders who had revived and taken action. The collision between the two of them was only the power of the collision. Perhaps the center of the collision was enough to contain the power of a peak god. However, the aftermath of the collision was nothing to the gods of the Lu family. Therefore, the members of the Lu family who were watching below only felt a slight impact. They did not suffer any substantial damage. However, their expressions all changed because the impact of the collision was too terrifying. Gradually, the annihilation of the collision disappeared, and a trace of clear color reappeared between heaven and earth. The members of the Lu family used everything they had to look into the void. However, the scene they saw puzzled them. At this moment, Lu Feng stood quietly in the sky. He had already returned to his usual calm appearance. It seemed the same for Lu Luo. He stood quietly in the void, returning to his previous appearance before the great battle. Silence. Absolute silence. After waiting for an unknown amount of time, they finally discovered something strange. Lu Feng's indifference was true indifference. However, Lu Luo's indifference was as if he had lost his soul. It was an indifference without any will. The moment they discovered this, countless people were shocked and horrified. They all thought of the same word at the same time, a word that no one wanted to see or hear: death. Young Master Luo, one of the former 7 great emperors of the Federation, the pride of the Lu family, the symbol of the Lu family, could it be that he really died? Silence, it was still that indescribable silence. Finally, an elder could not help but fly into the void. He was one of Lu Luo's ancestors, and he had the battle prowess of a true god. However, the moment he flew into the void, Lu Feng appeared beside him. He stretched out his arm and blocked the elder in a domineering manner. Seeing this scene, the elder was slightly stunned at first, but in the next moment, a look of anger appeared in his eyes. "Young master, what are you doing? Are you going to watch Lu Luo die?" Hearing this, Lu Feng remained silent. He looked at Lu Luo, his eyes filled with a strange light, a color of determination. After that battle, I understood his heart. Lu Luo is not what you think he is. He also has his own persistence and his own madness. The shackles you have placed on him, the shackles the younger generation of the Lu family have placed on him, and the pressure from the outside world is simply too great. It's so great that he can only hide his true self and appear in the most perfect form. This time, let him be willful for once. Let him be crazy for once. When he heard Lu Feng's words, the true god ancestor was stunned again. However, when he sensed that Lu Luo's life force was about to disappear completely, he could no longer wait. "Get out of my way." His face was already filled with a gloomy and cold expression. Lu Feng's status in the Lu family was very, very high. Although he was an elder, a true divinity-level elder, in terms of status, he was far from being able to compare to Lu Feng. The two of them were simply not on the same level. However, for the sake of his own bloodline, the true god elder couldn't hold himself back anymore. He was a descendant of the Lu family, and the true meaning of the Lu family's bloodline was hot-bloodedness. In the face of the obstruction of billions of living beings and the shackles of endless dangers, as long as one's heart persevered, nothing would stop them or hinder them. At the moment, the true god elder's heart was filled with the greatest perseverance. For the sake of his family, even if he had to offend Lu Feng, he wouldn't hesitate to do so. Lu Feng didn't feel any dissatisfaction when he saw the elder's gloomy expression. Although the elder viewed him as an enemy, Lu Feng knew that he was doing this for the sake of his bloodline. This was an enemy who dared to face everything in order to protect his family. Lu Feng smiled. It was an incomparably calm smile. "I'm sorry, elder. I can't let him go this time. I owe him too much. This time, I'll take it as my compensation." The Lu family elder was enraged. Your compensation is to let him die. What kind of compensation is this? Lu Feng looked over at Lu Luo, whose life force was almost non-existent. However, his eyes were filled with determination. He looked at the Lu family elder and said firmly, I believe that this is his choice. I'm afraid that this is why he chose me. Therefore, this time I will help him. I won't let. A boundless might spread and a terrifying aura surged, as if it wanted to annihilate time and space. This was the might of a true god. The Lu family's true god was furious. Lu Feng's expression was solemn as his aura started to recover slowly. Although he had broken through again after his battle with Rong Yuanyu and the human ruler's imprint, he was now even more powerful than before. He could even use the era of the Emperor and the 1 billion mortal worlds to suppress a true god. However, he was currently facing a true god from the Lu family. The Lu family's true god was much stronger than Rong Yuanyu's. If Lu Feng fought, he would definitely lose. There was no doubt about it. However, could he retreat? Could he retreat? Hadn't Lu Luo chosen him because he trusted him? He knew very well that if it had been anyone else, they wouldn't have been able to stop him. The Lu family elders would have stepped in and helped him. They wouldn't watch him hover on the edge of life and death. Therefore, he could only come to Lu Feng. Only Lu Feng could truly suppress him and resist the pressure of his family. He could only trust Lu Feng. Therefore, Lu Feng couldn't retreat for the sake of this trust. The Lu family's true god was in turmoil. Their greatest power had already been displayed. He couldn't wait any longer. At the same time, Lu Feng instantly entered the peak state of his life. At this moment, His Majesty made it impossible for anyone to look directly at him. Just one look was enough to make one's soul tremble. Relying on the Supreme Emperor behind him, the existence of the omnipotent Futu, Lu Feng's power wasn't inferior to this true god elders in the slightest. This scene caused the younger generation to go completely crazy. They finally understood why the unrestrained younger generation of the human race viewed Lu Feng as their faith and totem. Indeed, Lu Feng's power was too terrifying. It was too extreme. He could bear the weight of all beliefs. In the next moment, the Lu family's true god unleashed an extremely violent attack. This was definitely a true god-level attack. If it had been anyone else, they would have been annihilated in an instant. However, the person he wanted to kill was Lu Feng. Lu Feng was fearless. "I am the Emperor." The same shocking attack caused the void to tremble. The power generated by this attack was much stronger than when Lu Feng and Lu Luo had clashed. At this moment, many elders started to get busy again. They were really busy, as the aftermath of this attack was enough to wipe out the Lu family's collateral relative. Finally, they used up all their strength to block this attack. At the moment, the elders could only stand where they were. They didn't dare step forward to mediate, as they were afraid that if they did, the two of them would instantly clash again. If that happened, even a little bit of the aftermath would be enough to seriously injure countless descendants of the Lu family. Furthermore, the true supreme existences of the Lu family, the elders of the previous generation, didn't take action. There had to be a reason for this. Therefore, these elders wouldn't take action either. Lu Feng and the Lu family elder naturally saw this scene. They knew that they couldn't continue fighting. The true god of the Lu family didn't have the confidence to suppress Lu Feng with one blow. If they continued fighting, he couldn't bear the consequences of any accident. He looked at Lu Feng with eyes full of anger and anxiety. "Do you know that you are sending him into the abyss of death? You are not helping him." The true god of the Lu family was on the verge of going crazy. Lu Luo was his great-grandson, his only great-grandson. How could he just watch him die like this? "I don't know what you have agreed to. I don't know what the two of you are trying to do. But have you ever thought that if he fails, then he will die completely?" When he heard this, Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. Yes, if they failed, Lu Luo would die. This was something that Lu Feng hadn't thought about. He really hadn't thought about it. He lowered his head slightly. A hint of joy flashed across the Lu family elder's eyes. He took a step forward and was about to reach Lu Luo's side. However, the moment he moved, Lu Feng's terrifying might locked onto his body once again. The Lu family elder looked at Lu Feng. He couldn't describe his current feelings. Lu Feng's lowered head finally lifted up slowly. This time, there was an incomparably resolute look in his eyes. Death? I'm afraid he already expected this. In that case, if he still came to find me, then he must be prepared to die. He trusts me, so I have to trust him too. Chapter 649. Lu Feng was powerful, incomparably powerful. A resolute look appeared in Lu Feng's eyes as he stared at the Lu family elder and the many other Lu family members who were paying attention to the situation. If he dies, I, Lu Feng, am willing to bear all the responsibility. Countless people were silent, completely silent. All they could do was stare blankly at Lu Feng, and at everything that was happening. They had already vaguely understood something. Although they didn't know the specifics, they didn't know what had been agreed upon. However, they all knew that Lu Luo's current state seemed to have been deliberately conjured up. Time trickled by slowly. 1 minute, 2 minutes. In the blink of an eye, 10 minutes had passed. Finally, the flames of life in Lu Luo's body were completely extinguished. However, Lu Luo didn't wake up even at the last moment. His eyes were completely ashen as he stared blankly ahead. The Lu family elder's face was deathly pale. His eyes were filled with fury and grief. He stared at Lu Feng as if he were looking at an exceptional enemy. They knew that Lu Luo had failed. He had fallen on the brink of success and lost his life in the end. As Lu Luo's family, the elder had lost more than just his feelings. He had also lost a form of spiritual sustenance. He was completely sorrowful and furious. Lu Feng was still as calm as ever. Nobody could see anything strange in his eyes. Finally, the true God Elder exploded. "Is this what you want? Is this what you want, young master? You said that you want to take responsibility. How are you going to take responsibility? What right do you have to take responsibility? Tell me, tell me." His roar reverberated throughout the void. Everyone was silent. Nobody spoke up for Lu Feng, as they also believed that Lu Feng had really made a mistake. Lu Luo had been a demon. He had been the emperor of massacre. With the help of the Lu family in the future, he would definitely have been able to become an almighty virtual king. Even the Lu family would not be able to easily accept the fall of such an existence who was bound to be an origin king. Lu Feng didn't say anything. He was still as silent as ever. Finally, just as the Lu family elder was at his most emotional moment, Lu Feng actually smiled. Everyone was stunned. They didn't understand why Lu Feng would smile at a time like this. His smile was so sincere. "Congratulations! Luo King!" Everyone was stunned. Everyone was dumbfounded. They looked at the silent figure in the sky. They were all dumbfounded. At that moment, Lu Luo was still as silent as ever. In fact, the aura of death was still lingering around his body. Generally, after a powerhouse died, there would be death chi lingering around. But this time, they understood that something was wrong. Something was completely wrong. It was completely wrong. Even the members of the Lu family, who weren't even martialists, could clearly sense that something was wrong. Something was completely wrong. There was a strong death aura around Lu Luo's body. However, this death aura wasn't the kind of death aura that came from a corpse that had been destroyed. This seemed to be a kind of true essence, a kind of power. Finally, Lu Luo's body started to burn under everyone's gaze. It started to burn fiercely under everyone's watchful eyes. This was a black flame. Just a glance was enough to burn one's soul. This is the flame of death. This is the nirvana of death. He He has been crowned a king among the younger generation. He had been bathed in the flames of death, born from oblivion, grown from death, reborn from nirvana, and existed in defiance of the heavens. He had defied the heavens. This was yet another heaven-defying existence. It was terrifying, shocking, and terrifying. Nobody had expected that he would succeed. Luo had actually succeeded. He had been reborn amidst the endless death aura. He had chosen to sacrifice so much. He had even put his life on the line to fight. Finally, at the final moment, he had succeeded. He had broken through all restraints and become the king of killing. After a moment of shock, the crowd cheered in delight. Luo's existence was a symbol of the entire Lu family's younger generation. Before Lu Feng's strength and Lu Feng's power had shaken the galaxy, the Lu family had only relied on the Eastwater Luo Emperor for support. His shocking achievements, his breakthroughs, and every battle he had fought carried the mark of the Lu family. Luo had sacrificed too much for the Lu family. He had sacrificed so much that many people's hearts ached for him. Although they had accepted Lu Feng's return as the young master of the Lu family, Luo was still irreplaceable in their hearts. They had hoped that Lu Feng would become stronger. They had hoped that the Lu family would become stronger. They had also hoped that Luo would become stronger. Now, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Luo had completed a heaven-defying transformation. He had actually ascended to the king of killing and become the true apex genius of the universe. This change delighted the entire Lu family and drove the younger generation of the Lu family crazy. Lu Feng stood quietly at the peak of the void. He nodded gently as he watched Luo bathe in the flames of death and gain a new life. This time, you used the final collision of death to finally surpass your own limit. You finally did it. When Luo had come to look for Lu Feng had been slightly puzzled. Luo had wanted to break through and become a fourth-level demigod. For a genius like him, breaking through wasn't very difficult. He had simply not needed Lu Feng's help. After all, the shackles of a fourth-level demigod couldn't possibly bind a freak like him. Any family elder would have been enough. However, he had still come and said those words. In that case, Lu Feng was truly puzzled. However, it wasn't until the real battle between him and Luo that Luo had displayed the power of death that he had finally understood. Lu Feng finally understood. It turned out that Luo's so-called battle and breakthrough had actually been a rebirth from death. He had simply wanted to comprehend the true meaning of death. That's right. If he had faced an elder of the family, they wouldn't have been so heavy-handed. They simply wouldn't have given him the opportunity to undergo the baptism of death. Looking at the entire Lu family, Lu Feng was the only one who could do it. Therefore, he had come to look for Lu Feng. Gradually, the black flames had disappeared. In the midst of endless death, Luo's lifeless eyes had finally begun to show signs of life. Lu Feng knew that Luo had awakened. He smiled at Luo. Lu Feng wanted to greet him. However, just as he was about to speak, he abruptly stopped. This was because he had noticed something. The smile at the corner of his mouth became even more obvious. Lu Feng sighed in admiration. He broke through again. Yes, Luo had broken through again. However, this time, it wasn't a breakthrough in aptitude. Instead, it was a breakthrough in level. He had finally entered the domain of the peak demigod. In the void, countless shocking phenomena appeared. Immortals were guiding the way, living creatures were smiling, and rare beasts were crying out in unison. The scene of a flourishing age and the spirit of a paradise began to appear at this moment. This is, a Lu family elder's eyes were slightly astonished. A moment later, a look of pleasant surprise appeared on his face. How could he not know about this kind of phenomenon? This was the congratulatory light from the heavens after one's godhead was condensed. Of course, not just anyone who had become a demigod could produce such a phenomenon. Only those monstrous geniuses had the qualifications to do so. Legend has it that when my ancestor, the human king, became a demigod, there was an auspicious sign that caused a super life-bearing planet to descend. Even the immortals paid homage to him. Compared to that, Lu Luo's current phenomenon is acceptable. Hearing this, the other elder nodded his head lightly. Speaking of which, I am somewhat looking forward to the phenomenon after the emperor becomes a demigod. He has surpassed our ancestor, the human king. Then, his phenomenon should be even more shocking. When they heard Lu Feng's name being mentioned, a joyful light appeared in their eyes. Demigod Realm 4 stages. Deification of the physical body, deification of the soul, deification of the will, and finally, the condensation of the Godhead. These 4 stages are the 4 transformations of the heavens. I'm afraid that after the first stage of deification of the physical body, the Emperor's phenomenon will far surpass Lu Luo's. Nobody could deny this point. Just as these people were talking, the phenomenon in the void disappeared. The only thing that remained was a figure that had come out of the void and walked into reality. Everyone's expression was incomparably strange as they looked at the radiant figure that had fused with endless divinity. They knew that this was because Lu Luo had just condensed his godhead. Due to the support of the endless phenomenon, he had appeared in such a state. Even so, it was still terrifying enough. One had to know that after a demigod condensed his godhead, all the support would disappear the moment the phenomenon disappeared. However, Lu Luo's current performance was still very far from the time when the support would disappear. At this moment, Lu Luo quietly looked at Lu Feng with an incomparably excited expression. Lu Feng, thank you very much. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't have succeeded. I would forever be the king of massacre, Lu Luo. Now, with your help, I have succeeded. I have become the king of massacre. I truly possess the ability to fight against all sides in this era of the War of the Kings. I am the King Luo who can officially compete for the pinnacle. Lu Feng chuckled and shook his head. All he had done from the beginning was to defeat Lu Luo and help him fend off other people's attempts to save him. Lu Feng really didn't do much. Looking at Lu Feng, Lu Luo fell silent. After a moment, he suddenly raised his head and looked at Lu Feng. At this moment, the heavens and earth were quiet. It was incomparably quiet. Faintly, everyone felt a terrifying surge of battle intent. Vaguely, everyone seemed to have thought of something. Their gazes towards the two of them were filled with a strange expression. They all understood Lu Luo's plan. Chapter 650. Sure enough, after staring at each other for a long time, Lu Luo spoke. Lu Feng, I don't know if I'm qualified to fight you now. Lu Luo was now a peak demigod, the king of massacre. Power was terrifying. Although he had just advanced, he was confident that he could fight a true god head-on. Therefore, he wanted to fight Lu Feng. He wanted to fight Lu Feng head-on in the only time possible. Lu Luo understood that he was now the closest to or stronger than Lu Feng. If he waited for a while, he would definitely not be a match for Lu Feng. Lu Feng's advancement speed was too fast. It was so fast that it was indescribable. He still remembered 2 years ago when he first met Lu Feng in the center of planet Gufang. At that time, Lu Feng was only a beginner warrior, and he was already at the peak of perfection. But who would have thought that when he met Lu Feng again, their levels were almost the same? If it wasn't for Lu Feng's help, he wouldn't even be qualified to fight Lu Feng. Now, with Lu Feng's help, he had broken through 2 great shackles in one go and become a true monster with the battle prowess of a true god. In terms of level, he was even 1 whole level higher than Lu Feng. At this moment, he was most likely to fight Lu Feng. He couldn't wait for his level to stabilize, because by then, Lu Feng would most likely have surpassed him. He quietly looked at Lu Feng, waiting for his answer. At this moment, everyone was the same. At this time, an elder walked into the void. Seeing him, everyone bowed respectfully. Even Lu Feng was the same. This was the true managing elder of the family, a member of the Council of Elders. Moreover, his strength had reached the heavenly god realm. Without a doubt, his appearance made everyone quiet down. He looked at Lu Feng and then at Lu Luo. The elder's voice was heard at this moment. Lu Luo, Lu Feng has just finished his battle with the human king. Let's continue this battle in the future. Hearing the elder's words, Lu Luo naturally wouldn't resist. He nodded lightly and silently prepared to leave. Looking at Lu Luo, who was about to disappear, Lu Feng smiled. Actually, he knew very well that this heavenly god realm elder was trying to protect him by saying that. Lu Luo had already reached the level of the king of killers. His power was terrifying, and he was now at the peak of the demigod realm. In theory, he even had the power to battle a mid-tier true god. Of course, although he had just advanced, it was impossible for him to completely possess that kind of combat strength, but even so, it was probably not something that Lu Feng, who had just fought a great battle with the human king phantom, could compare with. As for Lu Feng, although he had suppressed Rong Yuanyu, he might not really be comparable to a mid-tier true god. He might not even be comparable to the current Lu Luo. The reason why this elder had stepped forward was precisely to stop this battle. When they saw this scene, many of the Lu family's disciples knew that a battle was definitely impossible. Although they were somewhat dispirited, they naturally wouldn't insist on anything after witnessing such a shocking scene. They all turned around and prepared to leave. However, just as everyone was about to leave, Lu Feng's voice suddenly reverberated throughout the area. Then, let's go to the Milky Way and have a hearty battle. In an instant, everyone was stunned. They naturally knew what the heavenly god realm elder meant when he said those words. However, Lu Feng actually still wanted to fight. Could it be that he was really that confident? If it had been anyone else, they would have said that they didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. However, when Lu Feng said those words, everyone felt a kind of confidence, a kind of invincibility. No matter who it was, as long as they dared to fight, then I, Lu Feng, would never retreat or hide. Lu Feng's confidence came from his own strength. He firmly believed that he was invincible and could suppress everything in the world. Therefore, he accepted the challenge. Lu Luo suddenly turned around and looked at Lu Feng with a strange gaze. The heavenly god realm elder also had a strange expression. Everyone looked at Lu Feng, their expressions filled with all sorts of colors. Under the gazes of these people, Lu Feng turned around and looked at the heavenly god realm elder. Elder, I understand what you mean. I know that you are doing this to protect me. However, if I don't accept the challenge, then what kind of emperor am I, Lu Feng? At this moment, Lu Feng was filled with a boundless domineering aura. This was his confidence, and it was also where his persistence lay. The heavenly god realm elder looked at Lu Feng. After a long time, he nodded gently. Indeed, if Lu Feng dodged, then he wouldn't be Lu Feng. It seems like I have thought too much. The moment his voice landed, the elder had already disappeared completely. At this moment, only Lu Feng and Lu Luo were left in the sky. They looked at each other quietly. In the next moment, they looked at each other and smiled. Then, they disappeared in an instant. Countless people began to move, frantically rushing towards the void of the universe. They knew that this battle would absolutely shock the world. Although it couldn't be compared to Lu Feng's previous two earth-shattering battles, the intensity wouldn't be too far off. It might even be better. Therefore, they had to go and take a good look at this battle. In the void, terrifying collisions could be heard. When many existences appeared, the earth-shattering battle had already begun. Although they were separated by a long time, they could still feel the terrifying collisions. The entire void was being annihilated. Countless incarnations appeared, shaking the entire starry sky. The illusory image of a human king, the roar of a great demon, the suppression of an emperor. At the final moment, they even saw the arrival of an era. This was a supreme emperor who walked out of billions of tribute. He established an immortal dynasty, an eternal country, and a peak era. He was using the power of an era to fight against his opponent. In the end, the supreme emperor was always the greatest. He suppressed everything and completely obliterated everything. After a long time, the sky and earth became clear. All the battles finally disappeared completely. At this moment, a figure appeared. He stepped on the void and quietly descended in front of the many Lu family members. Beside him, a figure was quietly entwined, completely unconscious. Everyone knew that the unconscious figure was Lu Luo. At this moment, countless existences were in an endless turmoil. They looked at Lu Feng with a look of horror. Lu Luo, who had become the king of massacre and was at the peak of the demigod realm, who was an entire realm higher than Lu Feng, had actually been defeated. He had been completely defeated. Everyone could clearly see that there were no serious injuries on Lu Feng's body. Although he was in a sorry state, compared to Lu Luo who had already fainted, this kind of mess was negligible. Many existences were horrified. Although most of them did not see the battle, they knew how terrifying Lu Feng was. This was a complete and utter suppression. Lu Feng, not bad, a true divinity elder said, his voice carrying traces of fear. He was able to see everything clearly, and it was because he saw everything clearly that he was so terrified. Lu Feng's previous battle prowess had already shocked him. However, the appearance of the era of emperors at the last moment shocked him. He could not imagine that Lu Feng could condense such a supreme attack at such a young age. This was a perfect attack that used up an entire era. At that moment, even if Lu Luo used the Supreme King's advent, he was still far from being Lu Feng's match. This was already indescribably terrifying. Elder, send Lu Luo back. In the battle just now, he suffered some injuries. However, I think that he, who has comprehended the true meaning of death, should be able to recover soon. I have gained a lot from these two battles. I need to go back and comprehend it quietly. If there is anything, please contact me. After saying this, Lu Feng turned and left the void. Looking at Lu Feng's departing figure, many elders surrounded him and began to check on Lu Luo's injuries. After a while, they sighed softly. Just how terrifying is a monarch? They had already seen Lu Luo. Other than the injuries that Lu Feng said, the biggest reason why Lu Luo fell into a coma was that he had completely exhausted his strength. Lu Luo was now at the peak of the demigod realm. His strength was at least 100 times or even 1,000 times more than when he was at the peak of the perfect stage. However, in the clash with Lu Feng, he had exhausted all of his strength. This was simply inconceivable. Emperor, his accumulation is too great. Just now, other than being slightly battered, he looked like he was still at his peak. Too terrifying, too terrifying. His accumulation is even more terrifying than the peak of the demigod Lu Luo, the king of massacre. This is really unbelievable. Actually, Lu Feng was not as the elders thought. He was still at the peak of the demigod realm. Using the era of emperors twice in a day indeed made him feel tired. The clash this time was just as those people thought. He had completely suppressed Lu Luo. Of course, this was because Lu Luo had not completely stabilized. Although they had both improved, these two realms were not very stable. Therefore, his combat strength was limited and far from reaching that terrifying level. Therefore, Lu Feng could suppress him. However, if he waited until the two realms were completely stabilized, Lu Feng might not be able to defeat Lu Luo unless he used the ultimate immortal technique. However, Lu Feng understood that such an opportunity was as good as gone. After these two battles, although his level did not increase, he had reached the peak of the demigod realm. He was only a little bit away from a breakthrough. At that time, he would be promoted to a whole new realm. It should be known that the fourth stage of the Great Demon True Body, the Star Great Demon, would enter an extremely terrifying realm. Once he reached the star-great demon true body, even if he was only at the first stage of the demigod realm, he would still be able to easily suppress any beginner or even mid-level true god power. I really want to have a real clash with Lu Luo. It's a pity that he doesn't need much time to recover. However, if he wants to consolidate all his realms to the peak, it will definitely be impossible without at least a year and a half. If he only reached the peak of the demigod realm, it would be easy to consolidate his realms. However, his biggest breakthrough was the advancement of his own level. From the Emperor of Massacre to the King of Massacre, such a transformation was a complete qualitative change. It was really very difficult to achieve this kind of control. If he were to quietly fumble around, half a year would not be an exaggeration. Back then, Lu Feng had only managed to achieve this through repeated trials of life and death. Obviously, Lu Luo was not an idiot. He naturally understood this principle. Therefore, after he had fully recovered, he once again sought out Lu Feng. There was still close to a month's time before they officially left for the ruins. Lu Luo's recovery time was less than 3 days. Therefore, he spent the remaining time clashing with Lu Feng. Lu Feng was very satisfied with this situation. To be able to meet an opponent like Lu Luo was undoubtedly a great blessing for Lu Fenglai. Although fighting with Lu Luo would not allow him to break through, it would allow him to quickly accumulate experience and get closer to the peak of full circle. When the time came, all he needed was a suitable battle, and he would be able to smoothly break through. On average, there would be a shocking battle every 3 days. The children of the Lu family naturally benefited a lot. During this period, Lu Luo's improvement became more and more obvious. However, Lu Feng was even more terrifying. Although he did not break through, as the battle continued, Lu Feng seemed to be improving rapidly as well. He was no longer inferior to Lu Luo. Every time Lu Luo became stronger, Lu Feng also became stronger. In fact, he was even stronger and more terrifying. The result every time was that he completely suppressed Lu Luo. Lu Luo did not have the slightest ability to resist. In the end, he even fainted from exhaustion. However, it was obvious that Lu Luo's improvement was also very obvious. After the last few clashes, he was no longer carried back by Lu Feng. At the very least, he was able to return to his own residence to rest. This was a huge improvement. Finally, after Lu Feng suppressed Lu Luo for the last time, the day of the gathering finally arrived. When he felt the endless state of full circle in his body, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with joy. He could clearly feel that he was only one step away from the final breakthrough. As long as he had the right opportunity, he would be able to step into the demigod realm. The trip to the ruins this time will definitely be a time for me to transform. I have a premonition that I will be able to complete a shocking transformation there. It will allow me to be fearless of any young supremes of the previous generation. Chapter 651. This trip to the historical remains would definitely not be simple. Perhaps even the monstrous geniuses of the previous generation who had yet to ascend to godhood would show up. After all, this was a great opportunity for geniuses and monstrous geniuses. This was even more terrifying than the enhancement provided by divine objects. If divine objects were used, there would be certain repercussions. However, this was a down-to-earth cultivation. The disparity between the two was simply incalculable. The younger generation was only a few years old. Although they had only cultivated for a few short days in the sacrificial altar of the historical remains, the actual effect was equivalent to a few thousand times greater. This was a few years' time. Without a doubt, this could definitely widen the gap between them. Lu Feng slowly stood up. He had already heard the calls of his family members. He knew that now was the time. Hundreds of figures stood quietly on the plaza, waiting for the arrival of the family elders. Among these people, Lu Feng stood at the forefront. His existence made him the undisputed leader of the Lu family's younger generation. No one could deny that. After a few days of earth-shattering battles, the Lu family's descendants were filled with confidence for this expedition. Furthermore, when they saw the figure beside Lu Feng, many of the Lu family's descendants were filled with boundless confidence. Lu Luo had already transformed. He was no longer the Eastwater Luo emperor of the past. He was already a king, an absolute king among the younger generation. Coupled with his peak demigod cultivation, among the younger generation who could enter the historical remains, he was definitely at the peak of strength. Even the monstrous geniuses of the previous epoch would not be able to contend against him. After all, his rank was still there. An instant later, Lu Shun appeared in the boundless void. His appearance was so sudden that no one could sense any trace of him. This was the power of an unparalleled Almighty. In the entire galaxy era, very few people could compare to him. Lu Shun's eyes flashed with satisfaction as he looked at the many descendants before him. To be honest, this generation of the Lu family's descendants was both the weakest and the strongest generation in the Lu family's history. The weakest was because they were existences that had lost their bloodline. Their overall strength was relatively weak, and they were even slightly inferior to the other 7 divine king clans. But this strongest was also real, because they had Lu Feng. Lu Feng alone was enough to suppress billions of monstrous geniuses. He alone was invincible among the younger generation. And now, in addition to Lu Feng, Lu Luo had also unexpectedly made a breakthrough and became the true cornerstone of the Lu family. After experiencing the sharpening of life and death, the future Lu Luo would inevitably become a true pillar of support for the Lu family. Although he would not be as invincible as Lu Feng, it was not impossible for him to become a peerless almighty, or even a quasi-king of life and death. A quasi-king of life and death of the Lu family had made use of the Lu family's secret technique to give Lu Luo the possibility of stepping into the realm of the other path supreme. It could be said that the existence of Lu Feng and Lu Luo was the fundamental cornerstone of the Lu family's future domination of the galaxy era. Sighing softly, Lu Shun looked at Lu Luo with a trace of regret. He knew that if Lu Luo's bloodline density had been higher, he might have been able to condense the power of his bloodline into a true supreme power with the help of the gifts from the various almighties. After all, the bloodline of the Lu family was the noblest bloodline inheritance. Once Lu Luo condensed the power of his bloodline, he would definitely become a divine king. Let's take it one step at a time. In this era of kings, anything can appear. The power of one's bloodline might not be the only supreme power. Without looking at Lu Luo, Lu Shun activated his invincible might. In an instant, an even more terrifying might appeared. More than 5 almighties appeared. More than 20 almighties appeared. At the last moment, Lu Feng even saw the Grand Ancestor and the Third Ancestor, 2 almighties, walk out. Such a lineup was truly shocking. In the current era, even the pinnacle Overlord races would not be able to resist such a terrifying lineup if the Divine King did not appear. 2 almighties. Even the weaker pinnacle Overlord races would only have 3 to 5 of them. Lu Feng sighed inwardly. In the current era of the human race, there were only a few almighties that he knew of. But now 2 of them had appeared. Moreover, these 2 almighties only belonged to the Lu family. This was undoubtedly shocking. Of course, this also reflected the tense relationship between the human race and the Netherworld race. If not for this, there would not be such a terrifying lineup. All right, let's go. Following Lu Shun's order, the void trembled. In the Netherworld race's palace of death, shocking existences slowly walked out. Each of them was at the Almighty's level. At this moment, they had a respectful expression as they bowed slightly, quietly waiting for the existences that walked out from the palace behind them. In a trance, 5 terrifying existences slowly walked out from this ancient palace. Every one of them had an invincible posture, and they were all trembling in fear. They were all invincible almighties. Their eyes were hazy and filled with illusory colors. Everything in the depths of their pupils could not be seen clearly. The appearance of the five almighties undoubtedly caused the entire starry sky to tremble. Their postures covered thousands of years of the netherworld race's history. Their imprints existed in this eternal palace. Looking at the empty space in front of them, an extremely noble existence gently waved his arm. A crack appeared in the void. Behind him, an illusory voice echoed in this palace of death. From today onwards, it's time for the netherworld race to dominate the starry sky. Let those geniuses disregard everything and do their best to kill the Emperor. He will be the biggest stumbling block on our path to becoming the Overlord of the netherworld race. No matter what method we use, kill him, kill him. Many almighties and monstrous geniuses bowed at the same time and said the same words. Yes, ancestor, all the Overlord races in the starry sky were in turmoil. This time, even those monstrous geniuses that were deeply hidden by the peak Overlord races had appeared. Such an opportunity was truly a heaven-shaking opportunity. In this era of the War of the Kings, no mistakes were allowed. The slightest carelessness would cause one to fall from the altar. And this time, the trip to the ruins. There was no doubt that the gap between them would be huge. Therefore, whether it was the crown prince of the heavenly Tao who was cultivating in the endless abyss, the 31st prince who was meditating in the oblivion blood pool, or the silent feather you who was in the emperor's sacred realm, as long as they had not reached the god realm, all of them had appeared. They were about to take the first step of transformation. Relying on Lu Feng's strength, if he wanted to tear the void to a place closer to the ruins, he could do it in an instant. However, if he wanted to go to a remote place, it would take a long time. From the capital planet to the human king planet, Lu Feng took 3 days. If it was an invincible almighty existence, a few blinks of an eye would have been enough. This was the difference in strength. Even if Lu Feng had shocking potential, he still could not do anything in the face of an absolute gap in strength. If it was someone else who felt it, it might just be a thick sense of envy. However, what Lu Feng felt was a vigorous fighting spirit. He knew that he might not be considered much now. He only had invincible strength among the younger generation. However, when facing the older generation, he had no advantage. Not to mention others, just the golden generation of his previous generation, the generation that belonged to his father, Lu Tao's generation. Lu Feng had no way to go against them. Now Lu Tao was already at the sky's celestial stage. Based on Lu Tao's characteristic of letting go of all burdens and the resources of the human King Lu family, he would probably be able to advance to the peak of the sky's celestial stage very soon. At that time, his power would not be any weaker than an invincible almighty. He would even be able to suppress them easily. One had to know that although the Underworld King had cut off the path of the Divine King, Lu Tao was a genuine monster at the peak of the 7th stage King Path domain. He was a terrifying existence that could surpass the 7th stage challenge. The god-slaying power itself is a kind of ordinary supreme power. However, the human king bloodline of the Lu family is the peak supreme power. These two supreme powers are enough for my father to wipe out a large number of invincible almighties at the peak of the sky's celestial stage. Compared to his own father, the god-slaying Lu Tao, Lu Feng was incalculably inferior. When facing him, he would be reduced to nothingness in an instant. And what Lu Tao represented was the peak of the previous generation. Therefore, he was now just a monster with empty potential. Lu Feng was naturally aware of this. He did not let glory get to his head and think that he was really invincible in the present age. He knew that his current strength was simply not enough. Therefore, Lu Feng placed great importance on this trip to the ruins. He valued it very much. This is the beginning of my transformation. No matter what, I have to catch up with those monsters of the previous generation as soon as possible. Only in this way can I truly have the final say in this galaxy age. Only then can I truly obtain everything that belongs to me. Lu Feng understood that previously, he was able to make the Yuyo family compromise and directly kill his way to the Yuyo family. He was only relying on the name of the human king Lu family. If it was not for the human king's name, then even if there were 10,000 of him, he would still have died there. Lu Feng really did not like this feeling. He was an emperor. The existence of an emperor was to overlook billions of space-time. Why would he need to rely on others to dominate everything? Therefore, Lu Feng wanted to be strong. He wanted to be strong to the peak and become an emperor that could truly dominate everything. The crack in the void had already appeared. Lu Feng knew that there was the exit. At this moment, everything suddenly became clear. All the space-time turbulence had already disappeared. They were already in an incomparably spacious place. Chapter 652. I don't need an emperor to suppress you. I alone am enough. Before his eyes, the gigantic hand that reached the heavens had already descended. In an instant, countless star trajectories were destroyed, and the void was shattered. This was a move of the lawless technique, which contained the power of heaven and earth. It was violent and unbridled, as if countless existences were nothing in its eyes. However, when Lu Feng saw the frightening killing intent, when he saw the unfamiliar yet familiar back, a trace of dullness flashed across his eyes. After that, it was an uncontrollable excitement. The giant hand that reached the sky finally landed in front of him, in front of the monstrous genius of the Nether clan. Lu Feng could sense that the underworld race genius was just an ordinary genius. His strength was only at the perfect stage. Compared to the owner of the giant hand in front of him, the underworld race genius was inferior in both strength and aptitude. Therefore, if the giant hand landed, it would end everything in an instant. The underworld race genius would be annihilated. However, just as everything was about to end, a ray of light appeared in the sky. In an instant, the giant hand was annihilated. Not a trace of it was left behind. When the ray of light shot towards the giant hand, Lu Feng looked a little nervous. However, in the next moment, this expression disappeared completely. This was because an extremely powerful ray of light had appeared in the void as well. The two rays of light collided. There was no shocking fluctuation, only a kind of complete annihilation. A voice was gradually heard in the void. The underworld race is only this capable. You can't beat the younger generation, yet you still have to rely on these protectors. I really don't know what qualifications you have to be on the same level as the human race. The voice disappeared, but it had already spread throughout the entire starry sky. The moment this voice disappeared, another voice was heard. Using a king of massacre to fight against an emperor Dao domain genius. Only the human race can do that. Silence. Speechless silence. However, in the next moment, another voice was heard. It's not his fault that he is weak. However, it's his fault that he came out and spoke without thinking. If you want to insult others, you have to have the ability to bear the consequences. If you don't have anything, what qualifications do you have to insult others as you wish? The owner of the voice was the being who had waved that terrifying arm. At this moment, he was standing quietly on this ancient void continent, filled with a terrifying fighting spirit that could burn the heavens and earth. In the void, the old voice was heard again. That's right, but it's not about you. Are you the emperor? Since you're not the emperor, what qualifications do you have to represent him in doing such things? I think the main reason is that you want to use a weakling to establish your authority. That's all. If the crown prince of the heavens, would you still dare to say that? Hearing this, the owner of the voice wanted to say something, but in the next moment, another voice rang out in the void. Underworld race, underworld race. As for the matters of the emperor, he could do it himself. Underworld race. For a moment, the owner of the voice was slightly stunned. Just when everyone thought that he was going to fly into a rage, he suddenly turned around and looked in Lu Feng's direction. Yes, I don't need to get involved in the Emperor's underworld race. Although his voice was incomparably calm, anyone could see the excitement in his eyes. Countless people in the void focused their attention on this. It had been half a day since they arrived here. During this time, countless conflicts had arisen between the underworld race and the human race. There had even been more than a dozen clashes. However, the battle just now had undoubtedly attracted the most attention. After all, it had been a clash involving monstrous geniuses. Furthermore, the King of Massacre had also been mixed in. Therefore, at this moment, when the King of Massacre of the human clan showed a strange expression, everyone focused their attention on him. The various existences frowned slightly as they watched the young figure walk out of the crack step by step. This was because they realized that they couldn't see through everything about this young existence. He gave off a feeling that he was completely shrouded in the unknown and was filled with a vague consciousness. The figure instantly descended in front of the King of Massacre of the human race. The two of them stared at each other silently. After a long while, the King of Massacre of the human race suddenly swung his fist at the descending figure. Of course, this scene wasn't surprising because of the internal strife of the human race, but because of the punch of the King of Massacre. He didn't use any power at all. It was just a light blow. Finally, the fist landed on the figure. It's been 2 years. There were too many emotions in his voice, so it was easy to tell that the two of them knew each other. The figure sighed softly. He looked at the King of Massacre of the human race and finally smiled. Yes, it's been 2 years. 2 years ago, you were a mid-level warrior, and I wasn't even a beginner warrior. Now, 2 years have passed. I've reached the peak perfect grade, and you've also reached the high perfect grade. Who would have thought that we would meet under such circumstances in such a place, eternal? The King of Massacre of the human race was the young master of the Yaolanli family, which ranked in the top 10 among the first-rate families of the present era. He was Li Yongheng. Lu Feng smiled at Li Yongheng. Li Yongheng did the same. 2 years ago, a bottle of medicine from Li Yongheng had allowed Lu Feng to have an amazing encounter and complete a shocking transformation. He had become a truly supreme existence and started on the path to defying the heavens. Now they met again. At such a time, in such a place, under the witness of countless geniuses and monsters, they met again. They looked at each other without saying anything. There was no need to say anything that could be said. Although they hadn't seen each other for such a long time, when they met again, they understood each other. After all, they were brothers. They were really good brothers. I've overstepped my boundaries this time. Since you're already here, I don't have to worry about what's going to happen next. Lu Feng nodded gently and smiled slowly. He looked at the underworld race genius in the distance. You provoked me just now, didn't you? You said that you had to solve your own problems. Since that's the case, I'm already here. In that case, do you dare to say it again? Do you dare to accept my challenge? Lu Feng's words were so indifferent and casual. However, after these words came out of his mouth, countless existences sucked in a breath of cold air, and their faces were filled with shock. They weren't idiots. Naturally, they knew what these words meant. This meant that the person who spoke was the Emperor, Lu Feng. He was actually Lu Feng. At this moment, these people finally understood why the King of Massacre of the human race had such an expression after the underworld race genius had said those words. He and the Emperor were friends. Furthermore, they were very close friends. Naturally, he couldn't tolerate his friend being insulted. Now that the Emperor was here, there was naturally no need for him to do anything. Lu Feng calmly looked at the monstrous genius of the underworld clan in front of him. He was smiling, so indifferently. A level 4 Emperor-level domain realm genius was in existence that could be conferred the title of Emperor among the various peak overlords. However, in front of Lu Feng, he was just an ant. Even though his cultivation base was the same as Lu Feng's, he was still an ant. After the battle at the sacred remains, he had even been able to kill a true god who had condensed a supreme divine body. Then, he had used the era of the Emperor for the first time against the human ruler's mark. Over the past month, Lu Feng had clashed with Lu Luo every day. Although he hadn't broken through the final shackles and raised his cultivation base, his strength was really terrifying. Therefore, Lu Feng felt like he was looking at ants as he faced these monstrous geniuses. Everyone fell silent when they heard Lu Feng's words. Lu Feng was going to fight against the underworld race genius? This was simply an asymmetrical battle. That monstrous genius true cultivation base was much lower than Lu Fenglai's. Even if they were at the same level, even if he was already conferred the title of God, he definitely wouldn't be a match for Lu Feng. This was simply a qualitative difference. Countless people shifted their gazes to that monstrous genius. They all wanted to see the final outcome. That monstrous genius's face was deathly pale. He hadn't expected that his casual words would actually attract the Emperor. One had to know that he wasn't the only one who had said that. At this moment, standing in front of everyone, he wanted to be a little more forceful. However, he really couldn't say those words. After all, if he said those words, he would definitely suffer the fate of being completely suppressed. Back when Lu Feng had slaughtered his way through the void in the foreign battlefields, he had never cared about the status of his opponent. Finally, when everyone was silent, the evildoer guardian in the void spoke again. Emperor, your existence should be comparable to an immortal king or a demon king. You should be searching for the human ruler's mark. Is there any meaning in haggling with such a junior? Indeed, when they heard this, everyone nodded inwardly. Lu Feng was no longer on the same level as them. There was simply no meaning in haggling like this. However, in the next moment, Lu Feng laughed. It was a mocking smile. Junior? He's also considered a junior? If I'm not mistaken, then he should be 20 years old. As for me, I'm only a little over 18 years old. If we really want to talk about it, is he older than me? Lu Feng's words silenced everyone who wanted to say something. They fell into a deep silence once again. That's right. These humans had only seen Lu Feng's terrifying strength, but had forgotten his true age. Lu Feng was only a little over 18 years old. Compared to this monstrous genius, he was much, 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 much younger. Chapter 653. The silent atmosphere was stifling and unbearable. After a long time, the voice spoke again. You understand what I mean. You also know what I want to say. He is indeed older than you, but in terms of strength, the two of you are no longer on the same level. If you fight with him, you will only become a joke. Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the endless void. After a while, he nodded slightly. The mockery in his eyes became even more obvious. Finally, his gaze fell on the trembling monster in front of him. Do I, Lu Feng, need anyone to remind me what I am doing? I am who I am. Why should I care about other people's feelings? My title is Emperor, Emperor. Do I need others to point fingers at me and comment on me? The world was silent. Countless people looked at Lu Feng with strange expressions. If other monstrous geniuses heard this, even if it was the 30th prince or the crown prince of the heavenly Tao, they would probably give up in the end. However, Lu Feng didn't. He had always been doing things his own way. He never cared about other people's opinions. Lu Feng was right. As an emperor, why should he care about other people's opinions? He was the one and only himself. A terrifying tremor could be felt in the void. Everyone knew that the underworld race's guardian was about to make a move. However, in the next moment, a cold snort spread throughout the world. The almighty existences hidden in the endless laws of the underworld race felt a kind of turbulence in their bloodlines and a kind of trembling in their souls. In an instant, countless people looked behind Lu Feng. Their confusion was dispelled completely. They finally saw the identity of the person who had snorted. Lu Shun, the head of the Lu family. Prince Shun Lu Shun, the head of the Lu family. His authority was sky-high, and his power was terrifying. He was an unparalleled almighty. He was once the pride of the Lu family. Ever since he became the head of the Lu family, he had been quietly staying in the Lu family. Now, he had actually appeared. That's the great ancestor and third ancestor of the Lu family, two invincible almighties. To think that all of them have arrived. Countless people sucked in a breath of cold air. This time, the Lu family's lineup was really terrifying. Two invincible almighties and dozens of peerless almighties. With such a lineup, sweeping through the heavens was nothing difficult. Lu Shun's eyes were filled with endless coldness. He looked at the endless void and finally spoke. Since when did the children of the Lu family need to be judged by ants like you? Domineering. This was domineering. Lu Shun's words made everyone shocked and speechless. This was the head of the #1 aristocratic family in the world, a terrifying existence at the peak of power in the world. Silence. The void was completely silent. In the face of Lu Shun's provocation, many of the existences of the underworld race actually did not say a word. However, this situation did not last for long. This was because another crack appeared in the void. From this crack came a shocking wave of energy. 5 invincible almighties. The 5 ancient peerless elders of the underworld race. They actually appeared too. Could it be that this time, it's not just about sending those young existences into the ruins, but also a war between the 2 peak overlords? Previously, the arrival of the Lu family's 2 invincible almighties had already shocked many existences who had arrived a long time ago. However, the underworld race was even more exaggerated. They had actually sent 5 invincible almighties. What a terrifying lineup this was! One had to know that just these 7 invincible almighties alone were enough to sweep through any peak overlord race where the divine king did not appear. This was the terrifying foundation of 2 of the 3 peak overlords of the world. Lu Shun, we understand that you are overflowing with talent. However, your strength does not qualify you to say such words. In front of us, you are nothing more than a slightly stronger ant. You? Who do you think you are? The invincible almighties of the underworld race were clearly dissatisfied with Lu Shun's domineering attitude. The moment they spoke, they were filled with a thick killing intent. At this moment, countless laws appeared in the void, and a cold aura of death appeared. This was the terrifying power of invincible almighties. Their words caused the space and time to tremble. At this moment, the grand ancestor of the Lu family finally walked out. Dark Sovereign King, you have been hiding in the underworld race for more than 1,000 years. Now you have finally come out. I have been waiting for this battle for a very, very long time. Back then, if not for your underworld race's ancestor, the underworld king, sending his consciousness here, you would have died long ago. You would not be as powerful as you are now. How about it? Let's continue the unfinished battle of the past. These words caused the void to tremble once again. The grand ancestor of the Lu family was an invincible almighty. In fact, he was one of the peak invincible almighties. In the entire boundless universe, apart from the divine king, only the otherworldly supremes could defeat him. As for the others, they were at most on par with him. Looking at the grand ancestor of the Lu family, the dark sovereign king's expression was cold. There was a terrifying will and power that could kill everything in the world. Alchemy Saint Lu, if you want to fight, then let's fight. When have I ever been afraid? Alchemy Saint Lu. Apart from his identity as a grand ancestor, the grand ancestor of the Lu family, was also one of the top 3 alchemy saint masters in the world of alchemy. Alchemy Saint Lu's eyes were cold. This was the first time Lu Feng had seen such a cold expression from the grand ancestor. At this moment, Lu Feng was slightly interested in the relationship between the grand ancestor and the dark sovereign king. However, everything was not over yet, because in the next moment, 4 invincible almighties walked out from behind the dark sovereign king. They looked at the grand ancestor and the 3rd grand ancestor of the Lu family with a contemptuous smile. "Let's fight. Our underworld race has never been afraid." Countless people were trembling. They did not expect that a monstrous genius from the underworld race who had just insulted the emperor would cause such a situation to occur. One had to know that there were countless people who had insulted Lu Feng in the underworld race. Unfortunately, his insults were heard by Lu Feng's good friend, the young master of the Yaolanli family. Therefore, the following events had occurred, and now, there was a confrontation between the top powers in the universe. The atmosphere was extremely tense. The Grand Ancestor and the 3rd Grand Ancestor of the Lu family, because they were of the Lu family's bloodline, they were the true peak existences among the invincible almighties. Although there was no chance of victory in a 2 versus 5 battle, they would not be suppressed so easily. Once a great battle broke out, even if the 5 invincible almighties of the underworld race attacked together, it would not be easy for them to win. At that time, this place would be completely annihilated, and even the laws would be shattered. These people would not be able to leave safely. In an instant, many existences, regardless of whether they were from the human race or the underworld race, had a look of resentment. They knew that if it was not for that monstrous genius from the underworld race, such a situation would not have occurred. This day was destined to be a day of turmoil, a day that was destined to shock the world. Originally, many existences thought that the arrival of 7 invincible almighties was already enough to shock the world. However, it was not over yet. Everything was far from over, because just when everyone was nervous and thought that a battle was about to break out, many cracks appeared in the void again. Terrifying majestic auras began to emerge from the cracks, causing the entire void to tremble. The almighties of the human race had descended. Are you bullying the human race because we have few invincible almighties? What about now? Ice cold, it was endless ice cold. This time, an endless cold aura emerged from the void again. That was the aura that belonged to any invincible almighties. They had descended the human race. The invincible almighties of the Federation government, a primogenitor of the Beigong family, the primogenitor of the Nanming family, the grand primogenitor of the Serene Feather family. A total of 4 invincible almighties had descended. All of them had descended. In an instant, the number of invincible almighties belonging to the human race had reached 6. In terms of numbers, they had surpassed the underworld race. Moreover, among them were the 2 grand supreme elders of the Lu family, Serene Feather and Lin Huang. The 3 of them were equivalent to 4 invincible almighties of the underworld race. The situation instantly tilted. However, everything was not over yet. It was far from over. This was because in the next moment, another crack appeared in the void. An existence with a transcendent aura slowly walked out of the void. Behind him was a group of people who were similarly transcendent. Just by looking at their appearance, these people were not martial artists at all. They did not have any domineering aura. They were so calm and peaceful, like immortals from the 9 heavens who had quietly descended to the mortal world. However, when these people saw the people walking out of the crack, they were filled with fear. They knew who these people were. Void Emperor! It's the unparalleled Void Emperor. It's actually the Federal University's unparalleled Void Emperor. There are so many psychics. Why is it that even the Federal University has appeared this time? Could it be that the human race and the underworld race are really going to start an earth-shattering war here? That incomparably tranquil figure was the Void Emperor. It was an unparalleled Void Emperor. The unparalleled Void Emperor's existence must be a Void Emperor above level 5. Sensing the terrifying majesty of this Void Emperor, everyone understood that this was most likely an invincible Almighty. It was even the most terrifying invincible Almighty comparable to the Grand Ancestors. 7. At this moment, the number of invincible Almighties that appeared in the human race had reached a shocking number of 7. Among them, there were even 4 of the most terrifying invincible Almighties. Such a lineup was indescribable. The faces of the 5 life and death quasi-kings of the underworld all twisted slightly. They had never thought that the human race would be able to produce 7 such existences. If they didn't know that they were escorting those monstrous geniuses into the ruins, they would have really thought that the human race was going to war with the underworld race. At this moment, the arrogance from before had disappeared. The 5 life and death quasi-kings of the underworld race were not idiot. The 7 people in front of them were at least equivalent to 9 or even 10 ordinary invincible Almighties. Once they clashed, they would be completely annihilated in an instant. Looking coldly at the 5 life and death quasi-kings of the underworld race, the Eternal Night King of the human race spoke up. What? Do the underworld race only know how to rely on their numbers to fight? Now we're all here. If you want to fight, then let's fight. The human race will accept all of you. The Eternal Night King of the human race had already begun to emit his aura at this moment. The other existences also did the same. For a moment, the entire void was filled with endless turbulence, filled with earth-shattering tremors. Those existences below the invincible Almighties were all trembling, almost prostrating themselves on the ground. They were different from those invincible Almighties who had the protection of their race's invincible Almighties. These people had to face the invincible Almighties alone. The life and death quasi-kings were invincible Almighties. And the meaning of invincible Almighties was true invincibility. Their aura was the aura of invincibility. Those below the invincible Almighties were no match for them. The battle was on the verge of breaking out once again. Finally, the Dark King of the underworld race walked out. However, he did not walk out casually. In his hand, he was quietly holding a crystal. And it was the existence of this crystal that caused the faces of the human race's invincible Almighties to change. Life Crystal. The Life Crystal was a Grade 9 divine item. In fact, it was the pinnacle Grade 9 divine item. Such an item was something that even the invincible race would be moved by. Even the Divine King would want to fight for it. But now it was quietly held in the palm of the Dark King's hand. However, what truly shocked the human race was not the value of this crystal, but its use. What sealed inside? Could it be the grand ancestor of the Liu family? Had an ugly expression. After some hesitation, he spoke up. Hearing this, the Dark King laughed coldly. The Life Crystal is able to contain the power of the Divine King's power. That's right, it contains the life and will of our Nether race's ancestor, the Nether King. Once it shatters, the clone of our Nether race's ancestor, the Nether King, will appear in a short period of time. And this clone is equivalent to the ancestor of the Nether King descending personally. Hearing this, countless people sucked in a breath of cold air. The ancestor of the Nether King. Although there were many blemishes on his reputation, no one dared to doubt his existence and status. After all, he was the second strongest person in the universe. As expected, the 5 of you are here for the Emperor. You knew that the Emperor would not give up on such a heaven-defying opportunity. So, all of you are here to kill the Emperor. The Nether King is indeed powerful. Vaguely, the 6 quasi-life and death kings began to circle around Liu Feng. Although they were invincible Almighties, and some of them could even escape with their lives from the hands of invincible Almighties, they understood that there was a fundamental difference between them and the Divine King. Once the Divine King descends, they might be able to escape, but they would not be able to fight. Therefore, these people wanted to protect Lu Feng with all their might. Seeing these people's actions, the Dark King did not do anything. He just stood there quietly, ignoring their actions. Chapter 654. Looks like Dao Songtian was right to ask me to prepare. A long sigh resounded in the starry sky, ringing in everyone's ears. At this moment, many beings turned their gazes to the person who spoke, to the mighty Void Emperor. His indifferent posture was gone. Instead, it was replaced by a domineering and terrifying aura. Behind him, the terrifying crack opened even wider. An instant later, the shadow of a terrifying behemoth emerged from the crack. The moment they saw the huge object, everyone was stunned. Lu Feng was even more so. After a long time, Lu Feng finally recovered completely. He knew that its appearance was enough. Even if the Netherworld tribe had the Crystal of Life, they had nothing to fear. Lu Feng recognized the object that appeared. In fact, he was quite familiar with it. This was because it was the symbol of greatness that had been lying dormant in the Federal University's campus. Divine brilliance, this was the divine brilliance. The divine brilliance that the divine brilliance Heavenly Emperor had refined in the past. It was a terrifying weapon of war with a shocking amount of power. The divine brilliance Heavenly Emperor had almost entered the life realm of the life realm quasi-emperors. At that time, his power was limitless. He looked down on the galaxy era and was a terrifying existence that was equivalent to the Overlord of time. This divine brilliance had followed the divine brilliance Heavenly Emperor on expeditions and was stained with the blood of the Divine King. Its terror was unparalleled. Strictly speaking, this was definitely a peak 10th grade or even an 11th grade weapon. Now, there was a Void Emperor controlling the divine brilliance. Although it could not unleash its peak power, it was still possible to fight against a clone of the Netherworld King. After all, this clone could not exist for too long. Therefore, at this moment, the existence of the human tribe was still absolutely powerful. Their opponents could not resist at all. The faces of the Netherworld tribe could no longer be described as ugly. 5 of their invincible almighties had arrived here. They had brought along peak 9th grade divine objects, the terrifying Crystal of Life, and the majesty of the Netherworld tribe's ancestors. However, all their advantages were still illusory and a joke. In front of the 7 invincible almighties of the human tribe, there were even 4 peak life and death quasi-emperors. Their numbers were a joke. In front of the divine flame condensed by the former Shern Huang celestial emperor of the human race, the Crystal of Life and the avatar of the Netherworld King were just a joke. At this moment, all of this seemed so laughable. No matter how much they had schemed and manipulated, no matter how confident they were, in the face of true strength, all of this had become a silent mockery. If it weren't for the fact that the Netherworld race's strength was far inferior to the human race's, perhaps the Netherworld race would have gone crazy after being humiliated like this. Silence. Endless silence. The empty emperor of the human race smirked as he looked at the dark sovereign king of the underworld race. What? Do you still want to fight now? I know that the 5 of you came here with the life crystal containing the Nether King progenitor's clone. You came here to kill the Emperor. Although I don't know why you dared to take such a huge risk to kill a taboo monarch, I don't know why. But obviously your plan fell through. You guys have planned so much, how could we not have thought of it? That's right. The Emperor belonged to the human race, and the Emperor's enemies were all the other peak Overlord races. Since they wanted to kill Lu Feng, how could the human race, who was supposed to protect Lu Feng, not make any arrangements? If it wasn't for his existence, they would have even arranged for a supreme being of the other path to be Lu Feng's protector. Seeing the mocking looks on the faces of the countless human experts, the 5 invincible almighties of the underworld race had no choice but to endure it. They knew that they had no chance of success in front of such a strong human race. If they were to fight, the 5 of them would surely die here. Of course, if their deaths could be exchanged for the Emperor's death, they would be willing to die, because they knew that the Emperor's existence was a huge threat to the underworld race. The Emperor's current performance was like another human monarch in the world. Many existences were certain that Lu Feng would have no problem becoming the supreme divine king in the future. Even becoming the overlord of an epoch wouldn't be a problem. The underworld race and the human race were mortal enemies. Many existences in the underworld race knew that Lu Feng could let the other peak overlord races go, but he definitely wouldn't let the underworld race go. After all, Lu Feng's father was the godslayer, Lu Tao. His path to becoming the divine king had been destroyed by the underworld race's progenitor. One should know that in the world of cultivation, cutting off other people's hopes of progress was definitely a mortal enemy. And Lu Tao's importance to Lu Feng could be found out by anyone with a bit of intelligence. Therefore, they knew that Lu Feng definitely wouldn't let the underworld race go. An overlord of an epoch who hated the underworld race was definitely a disaster that could wipe out a race. Therefore, they were willing to sacrifice themselves to preserve hope for the underworld race. But now they also knew that all of this was impossible. Therefore, they could only give up and watch the human race quietly. Many existences in the human race also did the same. Both sides knew that this earth-shattering clash wouldn't happen. Although the human race had the strength to crush the underworld race, if a battle really broke out, there wouldn't be many geniuses and monstrous geniuses left. Shen Huang's appearance might implicate a lot of people, but it could only guarantee Lu Feng's absolute safety at most. Apart from Lu Feng, many monstrous geniuses of the human race had already arrived. If any one of them died, it would be a heavy blow that they couldn't bear. Therefore, the human race also didn't wish to fight. After looking at each other for a long time, both sides finally stopped fighting and cast their gazes into the distance. They looked at the illusory figure that was turning from blurry to reality 3,000 years ago. The opening of the 6 great relics created an incomparably terrifying golden era. Now, it's opening again in this golden era that was supposed to be the peak of the war. Then, what kind of earth-shattering change will happen this time? Many existences were anticipating everything that might happen. Finally, the grand ancestor of the Lu family looked at the dark sovereign king. His expression had already returned to its previous calm and peaceful state. If one only looked at their appearances, no one would have thought that the two of them were at daggers drawn and were about to fight to the death. Now, let the monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses enter that place. The human race was the stronger side and could act as if nothing had happened. However, the underworld race couldn't do that. They were feeling extremely uncomfortable right now. Therefore, although the Dark Sovereign King agreed to the Grand Ancestor's words, his expression still didn't look too good. He nodded lightly and didn't say anything. At this moment, the supreme existences of both the human race and the underworld race looked at the thousands of monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses behind them. In a while, the ancient relic will open. At that time, all of you will be able to enter it. The moment they heard this voice, everyone was in an uproar. These people naturally knew the greatness of this relic. They knew that once they entered, it would be time for them to transform. Therefore, these young existences no longer concealed their desires. Their expressions were written all over their faces. Excitement, incomparable excitement. Looking at the excited expressions of these monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses, the supreme existences of both the human race and the underworld race couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Their thoughts were completely different from these young existences. This was because they could see countless existences falling. Although this trip to the relic will have heaven-shaking opportunities, there will also be endless dangers within. The last time the relic opened, more than 70% of the human race's monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses fell. Hearing this number, everyone was slightly taken aback. Then, a trace of shock appeared on their faces. 70%. This was 70%. It wasn't 7, nor was it 70. According to the standard of 1,000 people, this was a total of 700 monstrous geniuses. Such a number was simply too terrifying. These people knew that there were dangers within, but no matter how much they imagined, they couldn't imagine that the probability of death would be so high. They had come here to make a breakthrough and lay a foundation for the battle of the monarchs. They hadn't come here to die. Gradually, some of the geniuses began to show signs of fear. They understood that among the 70% that had died, perhaps 99% were geniuses. After all, monstrous existences absolutely couldn't die so easily. Therefore, they really hesitated. Seeing these people's expressions, the 7 supreme existences of the human race and the primogenitors of the various clans remained expressionless. This was because they knew that this kind of reaction was expected. Finally, the great ancestor of the Lu family spoke again. If any of you wish to withdraw, you are completely free to do so. There is nothing shameful about this. After all, the probability of death is simply too high. You may be able to obtain heaven-shaking opportunities after entering, but you will have to pay the price of death. Therefore, it is still not too late to withdraw now. There was a slight commotion in the human race's camp. Finally, after a few geniuses walked out, more and more geniuses left. Even if they entered, what they could obtain was limited. If they survived until the end, they would only be able to enter the ancient altar. In the altar, due to their talent, the time they could obtain to cultivate was also limited. Therefore, this time, it really wasn't worth it. Finally, the group gradually stabilized. Looking at the remaining people, the great ancestor of the Lu family nodded gently. At this moment, there were less than 300 people left. However, among these 300 people, almost all of them were the top geniuses and monstrous existences of the current generation of the human race. Among them, there was Emperor Lu Feng, Feather Yu and Rong Hua, 2 monstrous existences, and the taboo monarch. There were also the desolate emperor, Wan Yueming, Qi Liang, Li Yongheng, Lu Luo, and many other monstrous existences of the Emperor Dao domain. However, it was a pity that they didn't see the former top genius of the human race, the head of the 7 great emperors, the Demon Emperor. This was a pity. Among these countless existences, it could be said that the monstrous existences occupied a lot of positions. After hearing the words of the great ancestor of the Lu family, they didn't waver in the slightest. This was because they were all monstrous existences. In the face of any danger or difficulty, they absolutely wouldn't retreat a single step. They would never, ever retreat. Have you all decided everything? Chapter 655. His voice was indifferent, but it was filled with an unquestionable majesty. Although he didn't use any strength, he was still a peak quasi-life and death quasi-king, a saint alchemist. Once the great ancestor of the Lu clan became serious, even a heavenly god would tremble. However, after hearing his words, many of the monstrous geniuses were incomparably resolute. They didn't say anything else because to them, any words were illusory. Since they had already made up their minds, they would walk on with the greatest determination. Finally, the great ancestor nodded gently and turned his gaze towards the nether race. The nether race's situation was more serious than the human race's. This was because this expedition to the ruins was the true test for the nether race. Natural disasters and beast disasters were nothing to worry about. The nether race wasn't afraid of these things. However, man-made disasters were what they feared the most. Now that Emperor Lu Feng had joined the human race, they were in great danger. These people knew about Lu Feng's past. They knew that Lu Feng had transformed into Futu and slaughtered hundreds of monstrous geniuses of the foreign race in the medicine god territory. Although there were 1,000 people this time, to the emperor, there was no difference between 1,000 people and a single person when he used the sky of green to suppress them. They were truly afraid. Therefore, more and more people chose to withdraw. Seeing these monstrous geniuses of the nether race withdraw, the Dark Sovereign King's eyes weren't filled with anger but satisfaction. He was truly gratified that these people had left. "All right, the rest of you, follow me and head there." The moment his voice landed, the Dark Sovereign King took a step forward and walked towards the virtual image that had almost solidified. Behind him, the 200 monstrous geniuses of the nether race didn't stop. They followed the Dark Sovereign King's footsteps towards the virtual image. There were slightly more than 200 monstrous geniuses from the nether race and slightly less than 300 from the human race. When the two races were added together, there were roughly 500 monstrous geniuses. These were all the monstrous geniuses who were going to enter this time. At this moment, the virtual image had already solidified. This was a spatial crack that resembled a space-time wormhole. It was deep and dark, as if countless secrets were buried within it, hiding unparalleled dangers. The great ancestor of the Lu family and the Dark Sovereign King of the Nether race looked at each other. In the end, they nodded their heads. Just now, they had checked the young existences in the opposing team. Among them, there was no existence above the deity realm. Therefore, this was enough. "The crack will open in a moment. I remember." But when is safety the most important thing? Everything else is illusory and dispensable. Do you all understand? They exchanged glances and monstrous geniuses of the nether race. Seeing this scene, alchemist Saint Lu finally left this place. In just a few moments the crack had completely opened. However, those who were able to come here were not weak existences. Able. T. Was. Humans. S. The Lu. He looked at one of the nether race's geniuses. His eyes glinted. As expected, the nether race is also prepared. You are indeed one of the top 3 Overlord races. The one at the forefront of the nether race was the epic monster. He was a true epic monster. Lu Feng was slightly shocked when he saw him. At the same time, realization dawned on him. He knew that since the Nether Blood race and the Heavenly Dao race could produce epic monsters like the 31st Prince and the Heavenly Dao Crown Prince, it was impossible that the Nether race, which was ranked 3rd, did not have one. In the past few thousand years, the Nether race had produced countless geniuses. Therefore, Lu Feng finally understood the situation when he saw the Underworld race's monstrous talent. But at the same time, he was also shocked. This was because Lu Feng realized that this monstrous supreme king of the Underworld race was truly terrifying, extremely terrifying. He was much stronger than Feather Yu Ronghua. The Nether race's supreme king was a terrifying existence who had reached the 2nd grade demigod realm. Furthermore, he had comprehended 3 supreme powers. 3 supreme powers and a 2nd grade demigod realm were enough to deal with Lu Luo. The Nether race's supreme king frowned slightly when he heard Lu Feng's words. However, he still spoke. The foundation of the Nether race is naturally not something the human race can compare to. After all, we have existed for a long time. Lu Feng did not get angry at his words. He only shook his head gently. Upon seeing Lu Feng's actions, the Supreme Monarch was clearly taken aback. However, Lu Feng immediately explained everything. Lu Feng's explanation infuriated the Nether race's Supreme King. What a pity! What a pity! The Nether race finally produced a young Underworld monarch. In the end, he is going to die here. Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a cold glint the moment he finished speaking. The young underworld monarch's eyes trembled when he heard what Lu Luo said. Emperor, you are only at the great perfection stage now. If you can defeat a true god, I can do the same. If you want to kill me, then kill me. I, the current young underworld monarch, will be waiting for you. Lu Feng smiled faintly and did not say anything else. Then, he took a step forward and walked into the crack. Lu Feng had some regrets during this trip to the ruins because he did not see Su Wenchao, Qi Yunqing, and the others. They were all true demons. At the very least, they were the emperors of massacre. They were definitely qualified to enter this place. It was a pity that their cultivation base was too low. They had not even reached the great perfection stage. Once they entered, they would definitely die. One had to know that it was impossible to help each other in this situation. After all, the place they entered was random. Without the help of their companions, although the two of them were monstrous geniuses and were even the kings of massacre, they had no chance of resisting the monstrous geniuses of the underworld clan. In the end, they were bound to die. This was what Lu Feng and the human race did not wish to see. Therefore, even though he felt a little regretful that he did not see his two brothers, Lu Feng was still glad. After all, the young underworld monarch in front of him was just a hidden young underworld monarch. Once he encountered the demons of the human race, other than Lu Luo, only the desolate emperor, Feather Spirit, and a few other demons would be able to escape. Looking at his appearance, it seemed like he was going to go on a killing spree. The young underworld monarch's voice was still echoing in his ears. However, Lu Feng did not really care about this, because he had the strength to not care. If it was before the battle with the human king's mark or before the battle with Lu Luo, Lu Feng might not be able to do what he said unless he used 1 billion mortal dust and 1 billion immortals. However, that was all in the past. Right now, he had already surpassed his previous peak and entered a completely different and terrifying realm. He had enough confidence. Looking at the young underworld monarch's disappearing figure, Lu Luo only had a mocking smile in his eyes. These days, he and Lu Feng were constantly clashing. Naturally, he knew how terrifying his young lord was. Even though Lu Feng still had not broken through, Lu Feng's progress was obvious. His strength was something that one would never understand if they had not clashed with him. Finally, many geniuses and demons walked into the crack and completely disappeared from this world. Looking at their departing figures, the 7 invincible almighties of the human race walked together. The Northern Palace progenitor sighed and slowly said, "I wonder how many of them will be able to walk out alive this time." Hearing this, the Lu family's great ancestor smiled. If it was in the past, then it would be difficult to say. However, this time, with the existence of the monarch, all of this is nothing. It's a pity that you won't be able to see Lu Feng's current strength. All of a sudden, the other invincible almighties revealed strange expressions. Previously, when Lu Feng created a shocking sacred miracle outside the capital planet, the Northern Palace progenitor and the Southern Palace progenitor witnessed it with their own eyes. They even gave Lu Feng the king's prayer. They were aware of Lu Feng's strength. However, at this moment, the Lu family's great ancestor said such words. This could only prove one thing. That was, Lu Feng had become even more powerful in the past month. He had become even more terrifyingly powerful. He was so powerful that this alchemy Saint Lu, who had always been incomparably rational, actually had absolute confidence. Time and space had changed, the world had changed, and all changes had taken place in a single thought. Lu Feng was no stranger to this feeling. This was because when he was transported to planet Kuan and when he returned to the modern realm from the foreign battlefield, he felt the same way. He understood that this was an illusion brought about by traveling through time and space. In the next moment, the haziness in front of him finally disappeared completely. Everything appeared before him. This feeling is really comfortable. Breathing in this primitive aura made Lu Feng feel extremely comfortable. The aura here was different from the primitive universe. Here, even the air seemed to be filled with a kind of free nomological laws and power. At this moment, Lu Feng felt as if he had returned to the foreign battlefield. This was because only in the foreign battlefield could he breathe in everything so comfortably and feel the abundant aura and environment for cultivation. After waiting for a while and confirming that no one had entered, Lu Feng finally walked forward. The place where one entered was random and completely unpredictable. However, there was a slight similarity. The place where they appeared was very close to the altar in the center. One had to know that although the existence of this ruin could not be compared to the foreign battlefield, in terms of size, it was absolutely incomparably terrifying. If one appeared at the edge, then for those who had not reached the god level, they would probably never be able to reach the altar in their lifetime. The altar would only be open for a month. Generally, a month was enough time for all the geniuses and monsters who had not fallen to arrive at the altar. This was enough to prove that the place where these people appeared was around the altar. According to what I said before, it seems that as long as one identifies a direction, one can reach the altar. The existence of this place is protected by a kind of theorem, and it is the existence of this theorem that determines everything. The laws here were different from those of the original universe. At this moment, there was an independent space-time law. The law defined here was that as long as one followed a direction, one could eventually reach the altar. This was very interesting to Lu Fenglai. After all, to be able to condense such a law that violated all the laws, there was no doubt that the creator of this place was extremely terrifying and matchless power. Chapter 656. No matter what, I should hurry to the altar. After all, this place will only exist for a month. A month was not a long time, but it was not a short time either. After all, according to normal circumstances, it would take about 2 days to travel. However, Lu Feng did not know how long he could cultivate in the altar as the taboo monarch. If it was really long, he would have to wait for thousands of years if he missed the time to return from the altar. In this era of War of the Kings, there was no doubt that Lu Feng would never allow this. Therefore, he had to complete everything as soon as possible. Along the way, Lu Feng chose a direction and began to fly quickly. Along the way, Lu Feng also saw many divine objects. Among them, there were even peak 6th grade divine objects. However, at this moment, Lu Feng did not care about these. In his eyes, there was only the front, only the front. Originally, Lu Feng's speed was very terrifying. However, after flying for a few minutes, he suddenly felt the world shaking. In an instant, a look of horror appeared on Lu Feng's face. This feeling, perhaps others did not know, but Lu Feng was very clear about it. Back in the foreign battlefield, in order to be able to fight against the Demon King, Lu Feng relied on the help of Grandmaster Wan Gui to find an extinct planet. He trained in various difficult environments on that planet in order to break through as soon as possible. The terrifying fluctuations at this moment were exactly the same as what he felt back then. Naturally, Lu Feng also understood that this ruin was actually an incomparably vast space continent. There was no planet on it, and this feeling was undoubtedly an environment created by the laws here. This should be a natural disaster. Lu Feng sighed softly, but his expression did not change much. His speed was still terrifying, and there was not the slightest pause. He knew that although this environment was terrifying, he could withstand it when he was only at the initial stage of upheaval transformation. Now that he had reached the peak of the perfect stage and become the purple-gold great demon, he was naturally even more fearless. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. If it's possible, it's not a bad idea to cultivate here. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time. To Lu Feng, such a harsh environment was actually a cultivation paradise. In this place, his great devil true body could definitely improve at an unimaginable speed. However, it was a pity that these disasters were too weak for him to break through. Moreover, Lu Feng only had a month's time. Compared to entering the altar, this was obviously nothing. Lu Feng didn't slow down in the slightest. It was as if his attitude had angered the laws here. Faintly, a terrifying calamity had already been born. Countless destructive storms swept towards Lu Feng, howling as they came. If Lu Feng continued to fly at this speed, he would probably encounter those destructive storms. However, Lu Feng didn't seem to care about them at all. He was still the same as before. But this is far from enough. It was far from enough. It was far from enough. The tribulations he had experienced were much, much more powerful than these. If it was someone else here, they might be incomparably fearful and stop. However, these were child's play to Lu Feng. Therefore, Lu Feng was even more powerful. Time travel, time travel. Ignoring those terrifying disasters, Lu Feng interpreted the existence of violence. Everything he encountered was smashed with a punch. Everything he encountered was forceful travel. In an instant, the destructive storms disappeared. The erupting volcanoes disappeared. The world of lava disappeared. Everything was constantly disappearing. After passing through everything, Lu Feng was still the same as before. However, a strange look appeared in his eyes. Finally, he turned back to look at the path he had taken. Lu Feng frowned slightly. The disasters here are really interesting. Lu Feng could feel that after he passed through those disasters and shattered them, there would always be some inexplicable power entering his body. If it wasn't for Lu Feng's keen observation, he wouldn't have been able to discover these powers. Although there weren't many of them entering his body each time. After going through so many tribulations, the number was incomparably terrifying. They were silent in Lu Feng's body. It seemed like they were waiting to accumulate to a certain extent before giving Lu Feng the most terrifying extermination. However, Lu Feng smiled again. It was the kind of smile that didn't matter at all. You want to stop me with this? This is simply impossible. In the next moment, the power of the great devil true body was activated again. In an instant, those strange and mysterious powers seemed to have met their natural nemesis and disappeared instantly. The existence of the great devil true body was originally created to deal with all disasters. These powers can't even be considered as disasters to the current me. They can't affect me at all. Lu Feng's speed became faster and faster. The disasters in front of him also became more and more powerful. Finally, for the first time, Lu Feng's speed slowed down a little. At this moment, a look of understanding flashed across Lu Feng's eyes. It seems like this is actually a world of tempering. Different tempering will appear according to different people. Otherwise, if all the trials are of this level, then I'm afraid that only a few people will be able to walk to the end. At this moment, even a terrifying existence like Lu Feng slowed down. If it were anyone else, they would have died in an instant. Every time someone died here, most of them died because of man-made disasters. The second most common was beast disasters. These two accounted for about 90% of the death. It was clear that if all the disasters were of this level, everyone would probably die. His speed was gradually lowered to the lowest. Lu Feng knew that if he continued to be so strong, then the disasters he would face would be even more terrifying. Although he was arrogant, he wasn't an idiot. Lu Feng knew that the current him didn't have the ability to contend with a remnant law. Therefore, he could only slow down. Sure enough, as Lu Feng's speed slowed down, the degree of destruction also decreased slightly. This was no longer a big deal for Lu Feng. After shuttling back and forth like this for a few hours, Lu Feng suddenly thought of something. His speed increased once again. However, this time, Lu Feng didn't reach his limit. Instead, he kept increasing it. Finally, when his speed reached a certain level, he started to move forward at a constant speed. The disasters that appeared at this moment were undoubtedly extremely terrifying. However, this kind of horror wasn't completely unbearable for Lu Fenglai. This was just the edge of his limit. Lu Feng was just that crazy. Even in such an environment, all he thought about was cultivation. At the moment, Lu Feng wanted to make use of this endless tribulation to cultivate. As he kept moving forward, Lu Feng felt that his cultivation base was undergoing a terrifying transformation. After clashing with Lu Luo for a few days, Lu Feng had reached the pinnacle. He had entered a state of extreme perfection. If there was another shocking collision, a life-and-death experience, Lu Feng would be able to break through. Obviously, this kind of environment seemed to be the most suitable place. 1 hour, 2 hours. In the blink of an eye, 3 hours had passed. Lu Feng's face was pale and his body was trembling. However, there was an immortal flame in his eyes, a kind of crazy persistence. Finally, when the 5th hour arrived, a terrifying fluctuation appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. Soon, I will be able to, soon, he would be able to. This didn't mean that he was about to leave this place. Instead, Lu Feng felt that the terrifying shackles in his body were about to shatter. He was about to break through. Break through. That was a very exciting word. Although breaking through was a common occurrence for Lu Fenglai, he was still very excited to break through at this moment. After all, once he broke through, his strength would enter a whole new level, a level that was even more terrifying and close to the level of the previous generation's supreme evildoers. Finally, as a terrifying fluctuation spread, the entire sky and earth trembled completely. At the moment, Lu Feng had already stopped in midair. The calamity in the void didn't disappear. Instead, it surged towards Lu Feng even more violently and terrifyingly. This was a true extreme calamity. Even a terrifying existence like Lu Luo, who could suppress ordinary true gods, would be severely injured in an instant. However, in the face of this, Lu Feng simply didn't care. He was completely indifferent. There was only madness left in his eyes. As he sensed this endless calamity, Lu Feng's voice spread throughout the sky and earth at this moment. Come on, let's continue. Help me refine this supreme combat body, and refine my path to invincibility. It seemed to have heard Lu Feng's shout and felt Lu Feng's crazy provocation. At this moment, the sky was angry. Countless destructive power descended. This kind of power was enough to turn a super life-sustaining planet into ashes in an instant. Naturally, in the face of such a calamity, Lu Feng's body started to collapse. He didn't use any power. He relied solely on the power of his physical body to wander in this endless calamity. Lu Feng's eyes were crazy. He didn't care about the melting of his body or the pain of his soul at all. What he cared about was the improvement of his cultivation level. He had experienced too much pain, so much so that he could no longer remember it clearly. Therefore, he didn't care about the calamity. Soon it would be there. Soon it would be there. Finally, as an even more extreme wave of energy spread out, the void shattered. At this moment, an existence of light appeared in the pale white sky. In an instant, a second light appeared, followed by a third. In an instant, countless lights appeared in the entire sky. They were so dense that they filled every corner of the sky. Some of the existences in the distance who saw this scene had strange expressions on their faces. Finally, someone murmured, "What's going on? Is this calamity really so terrifying that it can even attract the endless stars and turn them into a destructive power?" Many geniuses and monstrous geniuses paled at the sight of this. If it was really the endless stars, then unless one was a true god, no one could resist it. Endless stars. Although they were just stars, they still existed. However, their existence carried a supreme destructive power of heaven and earth. They were the pinnacle of destruction, the fragments of the 9 heavens stars. Chapter 657. The 9 sky stars was a disaster that could destroy the universe. It was a horrible disaster that would only appear during the great calamity of the universe. Once it appeared, it would lead to the destruction of the universe. As for these endless stars, although they were only fragments of the 9 heaven stars, the degree of terror was already unparalleled. Under normal circumstances, a real god would be able to destroy a star with a gentle wave of his arm. However, when faced with an endless number of stars, they would be incomparably fearful and would not dare to provoke them rashly. At this moment, countless stars were born in this place. This caused many existences to be completely shocked and at a loss. In the next moment, an existence seemed to have thought of something and his expression changed slightly. No, no! This is not the outside world, not the original universe. This is a completely independent world. How can there be endless stars here? This isn't a real star at all. It's a vision, a shocking vision. Could it be that a horrible being is breaking through? Gradually, many people thought of this point, and their expressions became incomparably ugly. Those who could enter here were all below the level of God. However, there was never a being below the level of God who could trigger such a vision. At this moment they were thinking hard. Soon, the beings from the human race laughed, and the beings from the nether race were sad. They all thought of a common person. Because other than him, there was no other existence that could cause such a shocking phenomenon. It is an emperor. Horrible, horrible! He has broken through again. How long has it been? How long has it been since he broke through? How can he become a demigod so quickly? This is impossible. I don't believe it. Countless beings exclaimed. They really could not believe it. Previously, Lu Feng was only at the peak of the perfect stage, and he was able to kill and suppress a true god. Once he stepped into the realm of demigod and began the true path of transcendence, then at that time, who would be able to go against Lu Feng? Even young Nether King, who was at the second level of the demigod realm, would not be his match. At this moment, the beings from the nether race all had the same thought. Faster, faster, faster. They had to enter the altar before the emperors of the human race arrived. Only in this way could they ensure their survival and safety. Enter the altar. Once you finish cultivating, you can be teleported away. Battles are not allowed within the altar. So, as long as we enter that place, we'll be safe. Many geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the netherworld went crazy. In this strange space, no tools could be used. It could be said that after entering this place, they had lost all means of survival in the original universe. They understood that if they encountered Lu Feng like this, they would die in an instant. Therefore, they had to be fast, even faster. This was related to his life. Soon, many humans noticed the same thing. All the geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the Nether clan were advancing crazily. They didn't even collect the divine objects that appeared around them. They were clearly stronger than some of the human geniuses, but they didn't have any will to fight. Their only thought seemed to be to madly advance. Of course, only a few monstrous geniuses and monstrous geniuses of the Nether clan were in such a state of madness. After all, only a few people were able to see the phenomenon of Lu Feng's breakthrough. However, even so, it saved the human race a lot of chances of dying. Bathed in endless calamities, Lu Feng finally completed the most thorough transformation. He finally made a complete breakthrough. Divine light flowed around his body. Above the boundless sky, countless illusory images of stars were constantly reflected. At this moment, an endless amount of power began to madly surge into Lu Feng's body. The trajectories of various stars were engraved in Lu Feng's body just like that. Stars. This was the power of stars. Although he didn't use any power, Lu Feng had an inexplicable feeling at this moment. That feeling was that when he completely stabilized, his body would carry the terrifying power of stars. The power of stars was a supreme power, a true supreme power. Although it wasn't the pinnacle of supreme power, in terms of destructive power, It was more terrifying than many pinnacle supreme powers. The power of stars belonged to the pinnacle, the power of destruction that almost surpassed the existence of supreme powers. This was a power that was born for the sake of destruction. If Lu Feng had time to comprehend it, then he might even be able to comprehend the seventh supreme power, the power of stars. Just as Lu Feng felt that the fourth level of the Great Devil True Body, the Great Devil Body, was about to take shape, an even more terrifying power surged. Lu Feng was stunned, and Lu Feng became even crazier and more excited. Bloodline surge. Shackles. Shatter. Bloodline shackles. This was the existence of the bloodline shackles. Lu Feng actually broke the bloodline shackles at the same time. He actually, at such a time, in such a place, in such a space, underwent a second bloodline awakening. The god-descendant bloodline still had 3 chances to awaken the bloodline. The first time was to awaken the bloodline. The second time was to become a god, and the third time was to become a heavenly god. Originally, Lu Feng thought that he would have to wait until he became a god before he could awaken his bloodline for the second time. Who would have thought that he would awaken his bloodline for the second time when he had just stepped into the demigod realm? Undoubtedly, this was an unbelievable scene. No one would have thought that Lu Feng would be able to awaken his bloodline for the second time under such circumstances. In this way, even if he didn't break through, his strength would be endless and terrifying, and he would also surpass his previous strength. Just the bloodline awakening of Lu Feng alone was enough to crush any ordinary true god existence. Now that he had experienced a breakthrough, Lu Feng was even more terrifying, and it was hard to believe. Quietly feeling the surge of power in his body, Lu Feng's eyes shone with a shocking light. At this moment, his power was abnormally terrifying. Looking at the endless space and time, it would be an extreme. My physical body is terrifying. I finally broke through. Previously, Lu Feng's physical body had a 7-fold increase, but now it had reached a terrifying 8-fold increase. Moreover, as an existence who sealed his bloodline, he would have 4 chances to awaken his bloodline. Every time his bloodline awakened, coupled with the terror of the great demon true body, it would be enough to double the increase. 2 more times, even if he didn't have any fortuitous encounters, when he became a heavenly god, his physical body would be able to increase 10-fold. One had to know that among the 3 great forbidden mythological domains of the Divine King, the physical body forbidden mythological domain was one of them. Entering this domain, the strength of one's physical body would increase by 11 times. Usually, the Divine King's physical body would only be around 10 times stronger. In other words, as long as Lu Feng became a heavenly god existence, he would be equivalent to the normal physical body of the Divine King. Is this the terror of my bloodline and the great demon true body? In the future, I will really be so terrifying, so unparalleled. Martial path incarnation could break through. Lu Feng had absolute confidence in this. After all, his martial path incarnation had displayed a terror that surpassed that of the sovereign path incarnation. Lu Feng also had confidence in his current physical body. After all, he hadn't used any divine items to strengthen his physical body. In addition to the terror of the late-stage great demon true body, it wouldn't be too big of a problem for him to enter the forbidden mythological domain. As for the final cultivation technique, Lu Feng was even more confident in it. Because he had the existence of the divine origin, his comprehension was absolutely extreme. In addition to his self-confidence, Lu Feng believed that his soul supremacy could definitely enter the mythological domain as well. As for the 3 great forbidden mythological domains, he had great confidence in breaking through them. As long as he became the Supreme Divine King, he might even be able to break through all 3 domains at the same time. At that time, he would directly surpass the Supreme Divine King, surpass the Overlord of Time, and directly enter the level of the Overlord of the epoch. Back then, when the Supreme Human King had become the Supreme Divine King, he had shattered two of the Divine King's forbidden mythological domains at once and instantly become the Overlord of Time. And now, according to his estimations, Lu Feng could even surpass the Supreme Human King in the final domain and enter the even more powerful Forbidden Domain, directly becoming a true Overlord of the epoch. The most crucial part of becoming a Supreme Overlord is the legendary Forbidden Combat Strength mythological domain, and this Forbidden Combat Strength mythological domain is the Emperor's domain. Legend has it that the existence of the Battle of the Kings will eventually enter the Emperor's domain. However, they will always enter the domain of the false Emperor. Lu Feng knew this as well. This was an inexplicable part of his memory. He didn't know where it came from, nor did he know where it came from. However, there was such a memory in Lu Feng's mind, and he couldn't remember the time when this memory appeared. However, Lu Feng could confirm that the final victors of the Battle of the Kings had all entered the domain of the false Emperor. Therefore, they couldn't possess the true power of the Emperor's domain. They couldn't shatter the Forbidden Combat Strength mythological domain, and they were still overlords of the epoch. They couldn't enter the realm of the Supreme Overlord. According to my memory, only the appearance of the taboo monarch can truly open the Emperor's domain, and only then can the Forbidden Combat Strength mythological domain appear and become a true Supreme Overlord. If I want to truly be comparable to my ancestor, the Supreme Human King, then I must win this Battle of the Kings. I must win completely and stand at the ultimate peak. Only then can I truly become a Supreme Overlord. Lu Feng also understood this, and he knew that the other taboo monarchs were also aware of this. Otherwise, why would they travel through endless time and space just for the right time like this? One had to know that they had experienced countless eras and eras, and they had also experienced many Battle of the Kings. If they really wanted to become an overlord of the epoch, then Lu Feng believed that the existence of the taboo monarch could definitely be easily achieved, even in an era without a Battle of the Kings. Therefore, they gave up everything and traveled through endless eras to this era for the sake of the true Emperor's domain, the realm of the Supreme Overlord. For this Battle of the Kings, Lu Feng's insistence in his heart was mostly because of his Emperor title, and because of his character. He absolutely couldn't lose to anyone. And now, with the existence of the Forbidden Combat Strength mythological domain, he had even more reasons to persist. He had to persist and win. Only then could he be truly invincible for an era. His eyes slowly closed once more. This was because Lu Feng felt that the power of the bloodline recovery was slowly fading, and the breakthrough of the Star Great Demon body was finally about to be completed. Everything was about to be completed. Chapter 658. The wind and clouds were colorless. Heaven and earth were dim. The endless constellations had completely disappeared. The only thing that remained was the extremely gloomy sky. It was as if doomsday had truly arrived. It was as if the entire universe was about to sink into a terrifying vision. However, Lu Feng's eyes were still tightly shut in the face of this. He was not looking at anything at all. Or rather, he could not see anything at all. The first tier of demigod was the deification of the physical body. It was to refine the physical body into a quasi-divine body. It was a process of shedding one's mortal body. Although it did not strengthen the physical body by much, it would carry a trace of divine imprint. There was no doubt that this was also an extreme strengthening. Moreover, only by truly deifying the physical body could one be qualified to have a supreme divine body. At this moment, Lu Feng was quietly perceiving the process of the mythical transformation of the physical body. Finally, the dark clouds in the sky became extremely dense. The next moment, endless ferocious lightning filled the air vaguely. It was as if it would descend on the mortal world in the next moment. In such an oppressive atmosphere, even deities would have to crawl and tremble. They would have to constantly retreat and endure the most terrifying disaster. However, Lu Feng was still the same as before. He had not changed in the slightest. He seemed to have truly sunk into depravity. Looking at the vision in the distance, many monstrous geniuses of the underworld and the human race stopped in their tracks. They stared quietly. After a long time, they finally discovered something. Their expressions were extremely strange. According to ancient legends, when a heaven-defying combat body is born, the most terrifying punishment will befall and completely obliterate the heaven-defying combat body. A long time ago, there were supreme existences who had condensed the most terrifying and heaven-defying battle physique. However, in the end, they were completely obliterated by endless tribulations. There was only one person who was able to break free from the shackles of endless tribulations and condense the most terrifying battle physique. He is only at the Divine King's supremacy realm. However, he is not weaker than an epic overlord by relying entirely on his invincible combat body. These people were the true peak existences of the underworld and the human race. They knew countless secrets and naturally had heard of this matter. Being able to fight against the overlord of an epoch with the Divine King's supreme battle physique alone is unbelievably terrifying. However, it's a pity that even though he had the strongest combat strength, he couldn't enter the final domain and reach the Overlord realm. In the end, he could only come to an end. He couldn't even leave his name behind. This was the sorrow of an era. Since ancient times, many powerful eras have been like this. They all had unparalleled combat strength that could be compared to or even surpass the strength of those famous eras other than the primitive immortal devil era. However, because they were unable to reach the true realm, they were unable to become the true overlords of their eras. In the end, all of them came to an end, sorrow. This is the sorrow and helplessness of every era. At this moment, both the geniuses of the underworld race and the freaks of the human race sighed helplessly. However, their expressions all disappeared in the next moment because in the distance, the terrifying calamity had finally arrived. World-ending calamity. This is definitely a world-ending calamity. The phenomenon of the 9 heavens thunder, 9 heavens gale, 9 heavens karmic fire and 9 heavens stars. Legend has it that the world-ending calamity is made up of the 4 9 heavens calamities. Now, all of them have appeared. What kind of terrifying battle physique did the Emperor condense? The 9 heavens calamity. This was all the power of the 9 heavens calamity. The invincible battle physique in the past only went through 3 kinds of calamities. He didn't show the final phenomenon of the 9 heavens stars. However, the battle body that the Emperor is about to condense has even summoned the final calamity of the apocalypse. Once he succeeds, this will be the most terrifying invincible battle physique in history. Unlike the underworld race's geniuses and freaks, the humans all went crazy. In the eyes of the underworld race, Lu Feng was bound to fail. However, the humans all believed that Lu Feng could succeed. Because he was the Emperor. The Emperor was synonymous with a miracle. He was the complete embodiment of a miracle. During the Battle of the Sacred Remains, Lu Feng had fought a true god who had condensed a supreme divine physique. When everyone thought that Lu Feng would fail, when even the Lu family's ancestors thought that Lu Feng couldn't succeed, he had still succeeded. He had completed the most incredible reversal in history. He had actually succeeded. Although this calamity was going to be the most terrifying in history, they still believed that Lu Feng could succeed. Finally, the calamity came. The 9 heavens thunder came, tearing the void apart and destroying the mortal world. At this moment, the entire ruin seemed to be shaking. It was as if the entire space and time were shattering. It's just a phenomenon. How can it have such power? This is simply impossible. Even a true god wouldn't be able to survive such a calamity. let alone a peak demigod emperor or a true god. They wouldn't be able to leave safely. The emperor is dead for sure. The existence of the nether race had already determined that Lu Feng was going to die. The emperor was going to die completely. However, in the next moment Lu Feng appeared. Lu Feng's performance proved and explained that the existence of an emperor was truly unparalleled and mighty. His eyes were still tightly shut. There wasn't even the slightest movement in his body. Lu Feng was still in a daze. Finally, all the calamities came and fell on Lu Feng's body. The series of lightning was a baptism of calamity. If it had been any other existence, even a true god, they would have been turned into ashes in an instant. However, the current Lu Feng was completely different from before. He wasn't the slightest bit shaken. He was still as calm as ever. Back then, God Slayer Lu Tao possessed a complete and rich human monarch bloodline. His physical body was incomparably terrifying. Even so, he only managed to obtain 7 times the strength of his physical body after becoming a true god. However, Lu Feng was now 8 times stronger. His strength was simply unbelievable. Countless cracks appeared all over his body. A clear and transparent color slowly flowed out of Lu Feng's body. This was Lu Feng's blood. In the past, his blood had been red, then bronze, then gold, and finally purple gold. But now, after he had condensed the star great demon body, the color of his blood had changed once more, finally becoming a transparent color. Although his physical body was 8 times stronger, Lu Feng would definitely not be able to withstand the bombardment of the 9 heavens' profound thunder anomaly without any defense. However, his bloodline was still there. The most terrifying recovery speed was vividly displayed at this moment. In an instant, the damaged parts began to repair. Almost in the blink of an eye, he was restored to his previous state. As the 9 heavens' Xian thunder continued to descend from the sky, Lu Feng's bloodline was also constantly surging. It was constantly reaching its peak and recovering. Lu Feng's body was constantly trembling. He seemed to have reached his limit. However, when the limit was reached, an inexplicable mystery would appear and adhere to the surface of Lu Feng's body. These inexplicable mysteries seemed to be absorbing the destructive power and annihilating it. Therefore, every time he trembled, every time he reached his limit, Lu Feng would be able to recover at the fastest speed. It was to the extent that the energy that covered the sky was actually becoming stronger. After an unknown amount of time, the 9 heavens' mysterious lightning phenomenon finally disappeared completely. Their calamity had completely passed and turned into nothingness. Seeing this scene, more and more underworld race and human race existences in the distance stopped in their track. Their eyes were filled with different colors. These people knew that the calamity in the sky hadn't dissipated. This meant that the calamity hadn't passed yet. This meant that Lu Feng hadn't died yet. He was still alive. Humph, it's only the first calamity. He has the human monarch bloodline and that terrifying great demonic body. It's normal for him to be able to endure it. Since ancient times, many heaven-defying battle constitutions had been completely destroyed by the first calamity. There were very few people who could survive the first calamity. However, these people weren't surprised that Lu Feng could succeed. After all, Lu Feng was an emperor. For level calamity, this is the most complete and complete calamity. It's definitely the most terrifying calamity in history. How many calamities can an emperor withstand? In the past, the Divine King was able to challenge the Overlord of the epoch because he had completely passed 3 calamities. Now, Lu Feng had passed 4 calamities. The existences of the underworld race believed that Lu Feng should be able to pass 3 calamities. However, it was absolutely impossible for him to pass 4 calamities. They were all waiting for the moment Lu Feng perished. Under everyone's anticipation, the second calamity of the Black Wind calamity had finally descended. Unlike the destructive power of the black lightning, the black wind calamity seemed to be able to penetrate deep into one's soul and completely destroy it. Such a calamity was the most terrifying to many existences. After all, the existence of one's soul was the foundation of a person. Martialists didn't have as many soul defense methods as psyche masters. When faced with such a calamity, they would usually forcefully endure it. They didn't have any means of dealing with it. However, Lu Feng wasn't like those people. He wasn't just a peak perfect stage warrior. He was also a peak psyche master. His strength couldn't be measured at this level. If it had been any other martialist, they wouldn't have been able to withstand it. After all, the second calamity had appeared entirely to obliterate the martialist. However, this was nothing to Lu Feng. After all, Lu Feng's strongest point was his soul. Chapter 659. Inside Shen Yuan's spiritual sea, there was an endless churning. Monstrous waves kept appearing. In an instant, the violent Xian wind was completely annihilated. It was completely annihilated by the endless waves. In Shen Yuan's spiritual sea, Lu Feng looked coldly at everything in front of him. At this moment, he seemed to have become another existence. A supreme existence that had truly existed since ancient times. His eyes were so cold. This was not the kind of indifference one would have when looking down on an ant. Instead, it was a kind of extreme coldness that made one feel as if they were completely ignored. When the strongest Xian wind arrived in front of Lu Feng's spiritual sea, his cold eyes were still as calm as ever. In the next moment, he gently waved his arm and everything disappeared. What a terrifying monarch! He passed the second stage. The time he used was much shorter than the first stage. What about the third stage? Can he succeed in the burning of the endless karmic fire? The karmic fire still descended. It did not have a root, it did not have a trace. In a blink of an eye, it appeared around Lu Feng's body. This was the karmic fire. As long as it existed, it would continue to burn. It would continue to burn from the beginning. Nothing could erase it or extinguish it. The karmic fire calamity is one of the most terrifying calamities. As long as living beings exist, there will be karma involved. There will be the fetters of fate. Everything will ignite the karmic fire. Once it burns, it will burn everything until nothing is left. The first stage, the Xian lightning calamity, is a test of the physical body. The second stage, the Xian wind calamity, is a calamity for martialists. Then, the third stage is the final test for psychic masters, or perhaps for all existences. Monarch, can you create another sacred miracle? Legend had it that the karmic fire of 3 calamities was the ultimate test. Since ancient times, only one of those who had condensed an invincible battle constitution had been able to pass the final test of karmic fire. Apart from him, no one else had succeeded. He, on the other hand, had only managed to summon 3 calamities. But now, Lu Feng had appeared with the 4 calamities, the most terrifying of them all. Everyone was quietly watching, anticipating, the karmic fire burning, as if it wanted to burn Lu Feng to ashes. However, even under such endless torment, Lu Feng's eyes did not open. Tyrannical, this was Lu Feng's peerless tyranny. If it were any other existence, even if they felt the majesty of this world-ending tribulation, they would have been awakened and would have had to concentrate on welcoming this terrifying arrival. However, Lu Feng did not change at all until the third tribulation, the most powerful tribulation that had ever appeared in history. His pupils did not even open. This was tyrannical. Unfortunately, no one could see Lu Feng's current state, so they would not understand how terrifying Lu Feng was. If they saw this scene, they would definitely not doubt Lu Feng's existence anymore. The endless flames burned continuously. This was an extremely terrifying punishment. It seemed as if Lu Feng's soul was also burning intensely. Vaguely, one could see countless real and illusory flames appear in his body. The real flames were burning the physical body, while the illusory flames were burning Lu Feng's soul and the entanglement of karma. This was a kind of pain, a pain that caused both the soul and the physical body to suffer. The true essence of the third tribulation was the annihilation of living beings in pain. Once this pain exceeded the limit, once one could no longer persist in staying awake in this endless pain, everything would be completely burned away in an instant and be completely annihilated into nothingness. This was the true essence of the karmic fire tribulation. In the midst of the endless flames, Lu Feng's face finally distorted slightly. However, after a moment, this distorted color disappeared completely. Other people would find it hard to bear, but all this was nothing to Lu Fenglai. In the 2 years since his debut, the pain he had experienced was simply incalculable. The baptism of the illusion had strengthened his soul. In the abyss of massacre, he had experienced hundreds of millions of life and death situations, which had forged his ability to bear everything to the extreme. At that time, Lu Feng had not even been a martialist. However, he had still been able to bear it and return from the brink of death. This was him. This was his emperor Lu Feng. Now, this burning pain could no longer shake Lu Feng in the slightest. The true essence of the third tribulation is to burn everything. However, this burning cannot completely destroy everything. This is because the karmic fire has a cause and an effect. If this cause does not appear, then the effect will not exist. And this cause is the pain that surpasses the limit. Only pain that surpasses the limit is the cause of all annihilation. Once you can no longer endure it, then the effect will appear. The underworld race's existence had a cold, mocking look in his eyes. Although they had never experienced it, they could imagine how terrifying this pain was. The Emperor is just a monstrous genius with incomparable talent. After all, he is not of the older generation. He has experienced so many hardships, so this pain can really be considered the ultimate tribulation that will destroy him. Countless underworld race existences did not know Lu Feng very well. They knew how terrifying Lu Feng was and how powerful Lu Feng was. However, in their eyes, the reason for all this was Lu Feng's shocking talent and the protection of the human race. This had nothing to do with Lu Feng's own hard work. The being who condensed the supreme body, the being who could possess the battle power of an overlord of an era even though he was only a supreme being of the universe, he only went through trials and tribulations after he became a heavenly god. Legend has it that he seemed to be unable to withstand this painful tribulation. In the end, he chose to rely on strength to prove his Tao and forcibly cut off all the existences and relationships that were related to him. Relying on this, he finally escaped the fate of annihilation, survived 3 major tribulations, and became the person with the first battle body since ancient times. How will the Emperor choose? Countless people were paying attention. When they saw the sky turn into a sea of blood, the same kind of expression finally appeared on their faces. It was a kind of nervousness. The human race was nervous because Lu Feng would fail. The underworld race was nervous because they were afraid that Lu Feng would succeed. The greatest pain is coming. Emperor, can you succeed? Emperor, you can definitely succeed. You bear all the dreams of the younger generation. You bear the hope of the human race's rise. You can't fail. The younger generation of the human race all had determined looks in their eyes. It was just like in the past, when they believed that Lu Feng could succeed and complete the divine relic. Even if billions of existences denied it, even if all of them believed it. But in their hearts, in their eyes, the Emperor's existence was the only existence. You can't fail. As if to confirm the thoughts of the younger generation of the human race, the flames in the void gradually extinguished and were completely extinguished, just like that. However, the final tribulation, the 9 stars in the sky, was still there. They floated quietly, as if they would descend in the next moment. Although this was the final tribulation, a tribulation that many people believed that no one could survive, they also knew that Lu Feng had succeeded. Because this tribulation didn't disappear, it meant that Lu Feng hadn't failed. He had really survived the Hellfire disaster. Could it be that he also learned from that terrifying existence in the past and cut off all the fetters? Emperor, he also chose to run away in the end. Cutting off all ties was tantamount to running away. Many of the underworld race's younger generation looked at all this with a trace of disdain in their eyes. Although they knew that this was the only way to pass the tribulation, they still couldn't help but mock him when it really happened. After all, the one who was about to pass the tribulation was the Emperor. Lu Feng had created too many miracles and sacred relics. His existence was proof that he didn't need any embellishments. Therefore, although Lu Feng had succeeded in the end, the underworld race's younger generation couldn't help but mock and despise him. Emperor, you're just SOSO, the underworld race's genius exhaled softly. Although he felt a lot of regret about Lu Feng's success, this didn't stop him from despising Lu Feng. However, a moment later, when he wanted to continue paying attention to Lu Feng and see if Lu Feng could pass the final tribulation, a voice suddenly rang out in his ear. The Emperor is where the faith of the younger generation of the human race lies. He is where our hope lies. In the past, even if there was no chance of survival, even if he had to sink into oblivion for eternity, he never once retreated. This time, it's the same. The Emperor will not retreat. The underworld race's genius was jolted awake when he heard this. He turned around and looked at the existence that had appeared behind him. His expression was extremely unsightly and gloomy. The underworld race's genius was only at the initial perfect stage. Although he was also a peak genius, his true combat strength was only at the peak perfect stage. However, the existence he was facing right now was truly at the peak perfect stage. Moreover, he was also a genius, a peak genius. Nanming Shang was the young master of the Nangong family, Nanming Shang. He had actually appeared here. Originally, when the underworld race and the human race met, the outcome would be decided in an instant. However, Nanming Shang didn't make a move this time. He only looked at the underworld race's genius with a mocking expression. Silence, endless silence. The underworld race's genius had calculated everything. However, to his dismay, he realized that he had no ability to resist in front of the young master of the Nangong family. Even escaping was impossible. Therefore, he had given up on resisting. He had given up on everything. The underworld race's genius, who had let go of everything and didn't even care about his own life, was no longer afraid of anything. He looked at Nanming Shang and finally spoke after a moment of silence. How do you know that the Emperor didn't rely on severing those connections and ultimately survived? Nanming Shang chuckled. He turned around slightly and looked in the direction where the 9 stars in the sky were surging and about to fall. After a long time, he slowly spoke. The Emperor's existence isn't something you can speculate about, nor are you qualified to speculate about. I said that he didn't sever anything and relied on himself to survive, because I am one of the connections that the Emperor has. I, Nanming Shang, once had connections with the Emperor. If he really did sever everything, how could I not sense it? Nanming Shang had interacted with him during the inter-college competition. Therefore, he had some connections with Lu Feng before. Then, in the void of the universe, Lu Feng had finally fallen in front of the true god Rong Yuanyu in his peak state. At that time, he was one of the earliest existences to appear in the void of the universe. Their prayers had already connected their fates to Lu Feng. At that time, all the geniuses and monsters who had done what they had done were deeply involved with Lu Feng. If Lu Feng had chosen to sever his connection with them, how could they not have sensed it? Furthermore, the Emperor's existence is synonymous with greatness and eternity. He is an existence that we all respect. If he chose to sever everything, how could the Emperor still be the Emperor? How could he still be the Emperor that we believe in? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.